Hello, good morning. Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon.
Hello, everybody.
Just right
Yes.
on the dot.
Hi, Robert.
Hi, how are you, Bev?
Hey, Robert.
Well, yes, and I managed to finish on time to be here right on time, so all good. Yeah.
I thought I was going to be a little bit late as well, but I managed to make it as well.
Yes.
Hello, Mark. Hello, Jimmy.
Good afternoon. I think I've taken
Hello.
over for Mark Ford just fine. I was talking with my mute button on.
Wow, no
Hey,
mercy on my last day.
How are you, Mark? We will be missing you.
Yeah, I'll be missing this and you guys.
Yeah.
But I just lose the uniform. Still here.
We get to sign him up as a delegate now.
Good afternoon, everyone. Seeing that there is a quorum in the room, I'm going to call the meeting for May 31st, 2021 to order. To begin, I'd like us all to observe a moment of silence in memory of the children whose remains were discovered on a site of a former Kamloops, BC residential school on May 28th. Thank you. I'd also like to recognize that Ottawa is located on unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe Nation. We extend our respect to all First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples for their valuable past and present contributions to this land. We also recognize and respect the cultural diversity that First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people bring to the City of Ottawa. We are currently broadcasting on Zoom and live streaming on YouTube. Given this meeting is being held electronically, I want to caution that there is a possibility of technical difficulties. Should we receive any disruptions, I would ask that everyone remain patient as we work to fix the issues and resume the meeting just as soon as possible. In terms of meeting date quorum, as each item is presented, I will ask the board members if the item is received or carried. If you're joining without video, please say your name before speaking. If you're joining the meeting from a location with background noise, please keep yourself muted until it is your turn to speak. I'd also like to remind everyone to mute their notifications and alerts to avoid any disruptions during the meeting. Following the public meeting, we will have our in-camera meeting. I want to take a moment to speak about the board's public meeting start time. As was noted, at previous meetings, the board has been trialing different start times. This was done following a suggestion from the community. We have since heard from some members of the community who feel the earlier start time limit the accessibility of the meetings in terms of the public. As a compromise for the June meeting, the board will be flipping its public and in-camera meetings. The in-camera meeting will begin at noon and the public meeting will revert back to 4 p.m. start time. I also wanted to follow up on comments made at the last meeting pertaining to our agenda's compatibility with mobile devices. We are aware of the issues with our current e-agenda software. This software has reached the end of its life cycle and is expected to be replaced this year with a web-based solution that should provide easier and wider access for a variety of desktop and mobile devices. We'll now proceed with the confirmation of the agenda. So the agenda for May 31st, 2021, is that agenda carried?
Carried.
Thank you. And the minutes 38 of April 26, 2021, carried?
Carried.
Thank you. Committee meetings, reports from committee chairs and minutes, Human Resources Committee draft minutes 11 of May 19th, 2021. Member Nerman, as the chair of the HR committee, I will turn things over to you for a brief update on the last meeting.
Thank you, Chair. The Human Resources Committee met on May the 19th, 2021. We received a presentation which was provided an update on the OPS Talent Development Program During this presentation, a new learning platform called Delegate was introduced to the committee. Delegate will focus on competencies specific to members' roles within the organization while integrating a mentorship program. This software will be made available to all the service members as of today, that is May 31st. The committee then discussed the importance of merit-based promotions rather than time-based promotions. In addition to implementing Delegate to refocus competencies and formalize a mentorship program, the service will also be undertaking a review of their promotion process. Thank you, Chair. Those were my remarks.
Thank you, Member Nerman. Is this item received? Received?
Received.
Thank you. Are there any declarations of interest? Okay, seeing none, we have some public delegates registered to speak today. If you're registered to speak on a specific item, we will be holding your delegation until we reach that particular item. Some delegates may be addressing multiple items or items not listed on the agenda. We will now start with their presentations. A reminder that only those who registered and were approved to speak will be permitted to address the board. When I call your name, you will be able to turn on your mic and your video. Each delegate has up to 5 minutes to address the board. The list of delegates on the agenda has been updated since last Wednesday when it was originally published. I also want to remind delegations about the expected meeting decorum. It's really important that our meetings be a safe space for people to come forward and provide comments to this board. This board has an expectation that when people come forward and express their viewpoint on a particular topic, they not be exposed to discrimination, criticism, harassment, or any other harm as a result of their delegation. I recognize the value in offering and receiving well-intended constructive criticism that helps to foster improvements. However, when the commentary is aggressive or focuses solely on weaknesses, it can be perceived more as bullying regardless of intent. I would just like everyone to be mindful of this as we move forward. We now proceed with the first registered public delegate. I will call Robin Brown. Is Robin on the call? Robin, you're muted.
I'm mute. There you go. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can. Go ahead. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you very much. So hello, everybody. Well, like I've been doing for several months, I'm here on behalf of the 613-819 Black Hub to ask you to freeze the OPS budget this fall. When the Hub spoke at the March meeting, we urged you to freeze the OPS budget this fall because the OPS is a really bad investment. We're here today to back up that claim based on some things we recently learned from OPS members. As you know, all of you, except Ralston, approved last year's OPS budget despite the Hub joining 92, oh, there is, 1 second, and asking you not to. In doing so, you approved either $9 million or $11.5 million to expand the OPS's Neighborhood Resource Team program. I say $9 million or $11.5 million because there's two different numbers in the OPS budget. $9 million on page 108 and $11.5 million on page 89. For comparison, the city's entire climate change budget is $2.6 million, despite City Council having declared a climate emergency in 2009. Now, we trust that you're doing your due diligence and would only improve 9 or 11 million for NRTs if you had proof of their value. But based on what the OPS is telling us, that doesn't seem to be the case. I say this because on May 13th, I attended the OPS's NRT's info session as part of Police Week. The first thing that set off alarm bells for me was when I heard the OPS NRT program, the head of the OPS NRT program, Inspector Ken Bryden, say the OPS had hired a consultant to evaluate the NRT program. Then right after, OPS NRT member, Constable Paul McCormick, said the OPS had expanded the NRT program due to its success. Well, this begged the obvious question, why was the OPS evaluating the NRT program when clearly they must have done some kind of evaluation already to determine the program was successful enough to deserve the multi-million-dollar increase you all approved, right? So I asked Inspector Bryden on what criteria the OPS had deemed the NRT program a success. His answer was basically that they'd heard from people in the community that they liked the NRT program. So it appears we're to understand that you approved 9 million or 11 million to expand a program for which no formal evaluation had been done. But you may say, never fair, that's what the OPS hired the consultant for. And that might make us feel better if the consultant wasn't Carleton professor Linda Duxbury. Duxbury is the same professor who did the report on Peel Police's School Resource Officer Program and concluded everyone loved the program. The only problem is Duxbury didn't separate out answers from Black and Indigenous students in her study. She lumped all respondents together who answered yes to the question, quote, do you feel you're part of a minority? And concluded everyone loved the program. That means answers from Black and Indigenous students could have been lumped with answers from white men feeling like those OPS cops were caught on camera last month lamenting, quote, how the white man's day is done, unquote. Peel police are also the same ones who were found guilty of racism after officers hogtied a 6-year-old Black girl in 2016, and they have since ended their SRO program. In the fall of 2019, the OPS hired Duxbury to evaluate its NRT program, and it's clear why from this quote from a glowing article about Duxbury and the project in Carleton's Raven magazine. Quote, when she hears people say defund the police, what she believes they're trying to say is, we want a new model of policing, and greater investment in community policing might be a key component, unquote. The OPS doesn't want an evaluation from Duxbury. It wants a justification, and Duxbury will deliver, as always. When I asked Inspector Bryden why the OPS hired Duxbury despite her flawed Peel study, he said they hired her because of the Peel study, and then he admitted that he wasn't very familiar with the details of the study. This is why the OPS needs oversight, because cases like this show that in crucial areas, we need to ensure decisions are made based on credibly sourced information. That's why we filed an official complaint against Linda Duxbury with the Carleton Research Ethics Board for systematically excluding Black voices from her research, including the NRT study. You should base your decision on credible research and what the community overwhelmingly tells you about how the OPS causes harm. The OCDSB did that, and that's why they voted last week to cut $95,000 in funding for 2 school resource officers at Ridgemont and Gloucester High Schools. To give you more evidence, we've also hired consultants who have produced an excellent report on an alternative non-police system for responding to people experiencing mental health crises in Ottawa. We will share the report with you shortly, and you'll see it makes one thing absolutely clear. The alternative system will be way cheaper than sending cops. So we're asking you to do 2 things. 1, demand that the OPS provide you and the public with a detailed justification of the success criteria they use to justify extending the NRT program. And 2, consider the huge potential savings that our mental health report will show and freeze the OPS budget this year. Thank you.
Thank you, Robin. Are there any questions for the delegation? Seeing none, we'll move to Juju.
Hi all, it's me again. First off, this meeting time is absurd. This should be self-evident, given the few people actually around to delegate today. I had to ask for time off from my work to be here myself. It seems deeply ironic that you're here to talk about community engagement today when you refuse to even return these meetings to their original times to allow for community members to actually participate in this sham of a democratic process. Even just among those I personally know, maybe a half dozen people wanted to come here to speak today but could not. Anyways, I'm here today to respond to the atrocious delegation from the Chinatown BIA last month. It is nothing short of despicable that the BIA is using the stabbing death in Chinatown of a beloved community member for their own opportunistic political agenda. This is the same BIA that has been making it very clear for years that they want to shut down the life-saving harm reduction services that were his life's work. When they talk about safety, they mean the comfort and profit of business owners, not the actual well-being of residents. You need only see the way they describe people who use drugs existing in public as being a sort of property damage, without caring about the ongoing, deadly public health crisis that is perpetually underfunded while we continue to put money towards policing, and while these alleged community leaders insist that still isn't enough. Her description of NRT as compassionate, For example, is so untrue and detached from reality as to be laughable if it weren't completely appalling. I speak as someone who regularly attends outreach patrols in that same neighborhood, often multiple times a week, and has myself witnessed numerous instances of police harassment there. Policing is violence, and criminalization has a real and deeply felt body count among so many of our community members and neighbors in Chinatown. The only things it brings to our communities are more fear and death. The BIA's attempts to position Chinese people in this city as pro-police and anti-harm reduction are cynical and insulting, as are the OPS single quote own attempts to prop them up. I question, after all, why it is that they were able to be added to the agenda after the deadline last week, after their representative admitted to being personally called up by the chief of police. So again, I just want to make it very clear that business owners, with their own financial interests, do not speak for all Chinese people in Ottawa, no matter how much they, and the OPS, would love that to be the case. That is all.
Thank you for your delegation. As I said at the start of the meeting, the reason that we have trialed other start times is because of a request from the community to do so. As I also mentioned, next month we will return to the 4 o'clock start time and we will start the in-camera agenda at noon. So I think that addresses the concern in that regard. And as I said at the start of the meeting, and I think it bears repeating, the Police Services Board expect this to be a safe space for people to come and present their views in a respectful manner. And not everyone is going to hold the same view, but we do not feel that it is reasonable to have people unduly criticized or damned for their comments. And I would just reiterate the importance of showing respect to our fellow citizens and would ask all of you to do so going forward. I'm now going to call Jack Belmar. Oh, I skipped Kate. Sorry, Kate. We'll call Kate, Noyes, and then Jack.
Hi there.
Hi, Kate.
Hi, this is Kate. Hi, thank you, Chair. It's wonderful to be back. Yeah, I was also going to start by talking about the meeting times. I will still read my notes on that, but I'm just going to say this is not a safe space. Please don't invoke mental health language. This is not a safe space, and you don't have the ability to make it into a safe space. Please don't use that language. So first of all, yes, the timing of this meeting is utterly ridiculous. I've come to understand the reason for changing the times of meetings was because you were all working late. I find it very telling that your solution was apparently to simply make the meetings inaccessible to public delegates. I really do think that speaks volumes of your engagement. Get a little bit creative. I'm glad to see that you found some solutions, but the solution is not to cut us out. I'm going to ask you kindly to please show some respect. We were just talking about respect a second ago. You just mentioned respect. Please show some respect for the people who put in many, 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 many hours a month to be here, who don't get paid the way you get paid. Please try to understand that we also deal with time and work, and to not solve this problem by simply prioritizing your own comfort and acting like we don't even need to be here. It's very insulting, and as you can tell, the community at large is feeling quite disrespected and angry as a result. It really just honestly comes off as very hostile and disrespectful. So it's now been over 1 year, since George Floyd was murdered by a police officer in broad daylight, surrounded by witnesses and cameras like it was the most normal thing in the world to do, which, as you are very aware, ushered in a new era of worldwide cries for defunding and reallocating police funds and ultimately abolishing the system of policing. Yes, I'm talking very fast. I have a lot to say. I haven't been able to get into these meetings for quite a while now. As you have hopefully come to understand, at this point, abolition is not a new idea, it's only new to mainstream consciousness. I have personally been an abolitionist for 15 years, ever since I was a young person in Ottawa, coming to terms with the violent legacy of my home city and nation. It clicked with me instantly that it's a losing game with interests that do not lie with the people. It has been implied before that the very dedicated group of public delegates who continue to return to engage with you are some sort of motley crew of radicals who live outside of the norm, just some punk weirdos you have every right to ignore. Well, I'm a middle-aged white woman in an established suburban Ottawa neighborhood where the average house prices are around $1 million. I've lived here for 30 years, and I'm just one of those people who happens to understand that policing is inherently violent and can never, ever lead to happy or healthy communities or societies. And indeed, I have watched it affect my own community over the past few decades, and it's extremely disheartening. Policing is the hammer that has led us all to believe that every social issue is a nail. Human issues require a human response from human services. I'm also here to firmly remind you, kindly and gently, but firmly, that you're not the folks to be speculating about what improved human services might look like. That's simply not your expertise or your role. Yes, we obviously need a comprehensive, centralized mental health response and vastly improved infrastructure. And trust me, there are more than enough good ideas out there. But I only get a few precious minutes every month to attempt to get you to listen to me. And I don't have the time to offer a comprehensive description of what decent mental health services might begin to look like in this city, nor would I be willing to offer this service for free to this board. But in terms of harm reduction and overdose response, what I will remind you is that you're leaving out a very, very important group out of this discussion, and that would be peers. Peers, P-E-E-R-S, peers. My blood boils when I hear police officers and chiefs. Sorry, I just need a breath. My blood boils when I hear police officers and chiefs say that police officers are essential services in healthcare because only police officers could ever promptly arrive and respond to overdoses. And if we don't have police in our communities, we'll never be able to appropriately respond to overdoses and we will lose people. I will pause and remind you that ambulances also exist, but regardless, we're talking about peers right now. How dare you leave out the peers themselves who are far away leading the response to the overdose crisis, which I will remind you has been raging on in this country for years and years, to very little concern, especially from police. Don't you dare overlook or speak over the peers who are doing a better job than you could ever dream to with all of the money in the world. It is them who are saving their own lives and each other at the grassroots level, and it is them who need our support, and it is police who always attempt to take the credit when it is convenient. I cannot tell you how many times I've showed up personally to overdoses, hundreds of times. And the one thing people will say to me while people are literally dying is don't call 911, don't get the police. Don't talk about this as if the police aren't the single biggest threat to these populations other than the actual poison itself in the toxic drug supply. I don't have time to go over all the other things I need to mention, but I will mention that we're still dealing with white supremacist symbology in the form of these Blue Lives Matter patches, and the flag is still flying on Catherine Street. This was never a problem of aesthetics or uniform.
Just wrap up, please.
Sure, take down the flag and please freeze the freeze the budget. You need to freeze the budget, okay? That is the one demand I will echo at the end of this because 5 minutes is simply not enough time, especially with the inaccessible time slot. I will echo with the one demand, please freeze the budget for this fall.
Thank you.
And reallocate those funds to the
and
community.
Member Johnson, you have a question? Member Johnson, go ahead.
Yes, just a comment actually. So just in response to Kate's comment about not feeling valued, I just wanted to say that I do value the delegates. I thank them for their time. I'm learning from the delegates, and it's important in our responsibilities as board members to hear the community input, and I value it, consider it, and think about it. I also wanted to thank you for your work in assisting with overdoses in Ottawa. It's such a critical problem, so thank you for doing that, Kate. That's all.
Thank you, Member Johnson, and thank you, Kate. We'll move on now to Jack Belmar. Jack may not be on the call, so I'm going to move along to Julia Hamer. Is Julia on the call? Julia, can you
hear me?
Yes, go ahead. You have 5 minutes.
All right, perfect. Hello once again. I'm here today to speak to a number of issues, but I first want to say that I sincerely hope that this board can reframe their perceptions of how delegates are engaging here. Despite the continued inaccessible times and the constant tone policing that delegates face, we continue to return to these meetings. Diane, you frame our delegations as overly critical and only focused on weaknesses, and I really so deeply encourage you and all the other board members to see that as the generosity that it is. We are here offering you solutions. We are here offering you alternative paths. We're here to share our knowledge and share our expertise, and every month I'm blown away by both the knowledge and expertise and imagination that everyone brings here. I think it's really, really important for board members to not get stuck in the idea that we are just here to criticize, because what we are doing here is positive. We are here to try to make our city better, and we are here offering solutions. I'm also here to remind the board that more police does not mean that things are safer, and more police in fact means that people are at more risk of experiencing harm. Given that there have been a number of incidences of gun violence in the city recently, I would greatly encourage all board members to sit with what is probably your first instinct, that this means that we need more police and more security. Carol Ann, on Twitter, you say that this is a worrying trend, and I agree. It is a worrying trend that we keep funneling money into a police budget and away from community supports and services. The incidences are not a result of not having enough police, but a result of having far too much police and not enough of anything else. The current approaches to gun violence in the city are not working. If they were, we would not have experienced these recent deaths. Call for more police as a reaction to these incidents will only lead to more deaths and a continuation of the violence that already exists. Given that last meeting, we saw the death of a community member grossly leveraged as the need for more police in Chinatown, I'd like to take this chance to reiterate the Chinese Canadian Collective's call to action, including non-police intervention, including redirecting funds for additional policing in Chinatown to Asian-run organizations working with their own communities, language access now, stop gentrifying Chinatown, justice for migrant sex workers who are at increased risk because of the police powers granted due to the incorrect conflation that sex work and sex trafficking are the same thing, and status for all migrant workers. Finally, the agenda for this meeting discusses the role of the consulting firm PACE as intended to improve board engagement with the community, and especially with Black, Indigenous people of color in the community. As I've said, I've been to enough of these meetings now to see the many, many suggestions offered by delegates who wish to make these meetings more accessible and to improve engagement. I'm curious how the board thinks that this firm, with 3 white partners and minimal experience with grassroots groups, is going to provide more generative advice than if they were simply listening to and taking the advice of the people at these meetings. As we've discussed with previous delegates, this meeting was scheduled for noon. Last meeting, many delegates expressed their frustration with the 2 p.m. time slot due to work schedules and requested to be returned to the 4 p.m. time slot. I'm happy to hear that that is going to be the case, and I hope it will remain in that time slot. I'd like to present a number of suggestions from a fellow delegate who could not be here today because of the timing for effectively time saving in these meetings when they are at the 4 o'clock time slot. And I will not charge the $50,000 pre-consultation fee that PACE is charging you. These suggestions are: start the meeting with in-camera items first so that earlier start times do not impact delegates. Include 2 sections of public delegations at the start and the end of the meeting so that delegates have wider access and more options to participate. Give Peter Slowly a time limit for his report of 5 minutes for every item included. And finally, give other police and board invited presenters a 10-minute time limit for each presentation. As I said, I'm happy to hear that the meetings are coming back to the 4 p.m. time slot, and I hope that the board can remain reflective and critical about its why and how it is using this consultation firm to do work that I see community members in these meetings doing every month. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Julia, for your presentation today and for sharing your suggestions and your knowledge. The board welcomes a vast variety of views, and I recognize that you are here to make the city a better place, and we appreciate that. What I was saying at the start of the meeting, just to be abundantly clear, this board is open to hearing your constructive criticism, absolutely. What we're less amenable to is having members of our community unduly attacked for their comments, which are, or perspectives, which may be different than other presenters. And that we do find unacceptable. And that's why we're asking for all presenters to be respectful of one another. We'll now move on to June Girvin. June, can you unmute?
Madam Chair, can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Thank you.
You have 5 minutes, go ahead.
Yes. Madam Chair, respect. Thank you for giving me this time to make a presentation. And before I make the presentation, I'd just like to take just a moment to think about the Indigenous children whose bodies have been found and those whose bodies have still to be found. Thank you. Councillor Diane Deans, Chair, Ottawa Police Services Board and the Board. Chief Peter Slowly, Ottawa Police Services Operations. President Matt Skoff, Ottawa Police Association and the Board. This is a historic and unique moment, a unique moment in time, an interesting happening in policing here in Ottawa. I'm grateful that I have lived long enough to be part of it, to be experiencing this moment. I'm here to recognize and pay tribute to you for endorsing the United Nations Decade for People of African Descent. The decade has 3 pillars: development, recognition, and justice. The decade identifies people of African descent as a distinct group whose human rights must be promoted and protected. My research has turned up no other police services that has the board, operations, and the association all endorsing a statement pledging to protect and promote the dignity and the human rights of persons of observable African descent. So I imagine that your endorsement, your pledge to protect the human rights and dignity of people of African descent is most likely the first of its kind on planet Earth. It is trailblazing. It carries a lot of moral power. It gives a lot of hope. Your endorsement of the spirit and intent of the decade lays the ground for transforming policing here in Ottawa. It energizes the motto of our city, advance Ottawa, en avant. So I'm here to recognize your endorsement, to pay tribute to you, and to kick off a celebration of our human possibilities. You and I have inherited a past that is sad. There is much to heal. Your endorsement of the decade enables the start of a healing journey. Healing from the past we have inherited, healing that excites our better angels, healing that can create the Ottawa we want. In our multicultural, multi-ethnic community, we are gifted with world teachings about ways for healing, ways brought to us by fellow citizens from around the world. Teachings that inspire, nurture, and enrich our individual and collective humanity. Teachings that enhance our capacity for splendor, justice, reconciliation, teachings for resolution of conflict and restorative relationships. And here we are in unceded, unsurrendered Algonquin territory with teachings of the Anishinaabe, the people. The first peoples of Canada have gifted us with the teaching of the healing circle with 7 grandfathers. In paying tribute to you then, I offer to each of you a bundle for our healing journey. A bundle of 7 circles representing the 7 grandfathers. The circles have been painted for you by the Métis artist Stephanie Drouin. To each of you, we will offer a bundle. And the bundles are from the Zakira Dinkanish Education Center, Every Child is Sacred, Algonquin Elder Albert Dumont, Poet Laureate of Ottawa, Hewitt Walters of BAN, Black Agenda Noir, and a group of Ottawa elders. I offer the bundles virtually. They will be delivered to you. So Council Diane Deans and the Board of OPS, Chief Peter Slowly, Operations, President Matt Scoff, Ottawa Police Association. Let me say again, thank you to all of you, our fellow citizens, each police officer and associate who has pledged to stand in solidarity with the spirit and intent of the decade. Officers who endorse human rights. Officers who pledge to protect the human rights of all children of the maple leaf, children of all human colors of the sun here in Ottawa.
June, your time is up.
Thank
If you
you.
could wrap up.
Thank you. I'm finished.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions or comments for the delegation? Seeing none, thank you for being here. Our next speaker is Jen on behalf of the Chinese Canadian Collective. Is Jen on the call? And did Jack Belmar come on the call? No. Okay, I don't believe either Jen or Jack are on the call, so this will end our public delegations. Thank you very much to all our presenters for taking the time to be with us this afternoon. We will now move on to inquiries. Do any board members have inquiries? Member King.
Thank you so much, Chair. I do have an inquiry for the police service, and I have sent it in written format to our secretariat. It states, I understand that the OPS has a school resource program coordinated out of the Youth Intervention and Diversion Unit. Can the service please provide the following information regarding school resource officers, or SROs? Number 1, what are the key performance indicators for the SROs? Are there terms of reference available for the program? Number 2, what is the role of the SRO within the neighborhood resource teams? Are they solely assigned to schools related duties, or do they log information back to the NRT team? 3, can the service please provide the board with statistics about the SRO program? As example, interactions, how many incidents requiring intervention, how many referrals to diversion programs, etc. Number 4, how is the funding for the SRO program apportioned? Is there a cost sharing arrangement between school boards and the OPS, or is it funded entirely by the OPS? Number 5, what specific training is provided to RSOs that are not given to other members of the OPS? And number 6, school resource officers have been in Ottawa for 20 years, and in the Human Rights Policy Report presented to the board March 22nd of this year, and EDI update in September 2020, there was mention of a review of SROs. What is the status of this review? Who will conduct it? And when was the last time a review of the SRO program was completed?
Thank you, Member King. Member Nerman.
Thank you, Chair Deans. Chair Deans, I need some guidance. I have a question concerning this presentation by the OPS on the de-escalation training. So would you mind me to raise that after the presentation, or I can raise it now in advance?
I would ask that you hold that item and raise it after the presentation.
Okay, thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Anyone else? Member Meehan is on the call and has asked Vice Chair Smallwood to read an inquiry for her. Vice Chair Smallwood, do you have that?
No, I've had problems with my computer, so that's why I have this funny background. I'm working off my handheld. So to read something somebody sends me, I have to shut down what I'm seeing. And so I can try if you want.
Member Johnson, perhaps you could read it. We will send it to you. And if you could read it, if I had a copy of it, I could read it. Yeah. I have a. Member Johnson, did you get it?
I'll just check. So you've just emailed it? Okay, yes. Just a second. I don't see an email.
I just got it.
So, okay.
I will read it. So this is from Member Meehan. There continues to be concerns from residents citywide about speeding and aggressive driving in Ottawa. I know that the Ottawa Police Service has implemented a number of road safety initiatives like Project Noisemaker to address these concerns, and I know there is ongoing work through Safer Roads Ottawa. But I'm wondering if there are other measures we can use to augment the safety of our roads, including adding speed and red light cameras or other initiatives. Can you bring back a report to a future board meeting on what this service would recommend? Any other inquiries? Okay, seeing none, we'll just go through the consent agenda. First item of business is the chair's verbal report. We will hold that item and return to it. Second item is the chief's verbal report. We're going to hold that item as well. Third item of business is the OPS response to gun violence, and we're going to be holding that item for presentation. We have also had a request from members of council who I know over the weekend have received a lot of concerns from their constituents about escalating gun violence in the city of Ottawa. And they have asked for some leniency of the board today in order to allow them to participate in this conversation, specifically on the topic of gun violence. As a result, and on an exception basis, I'm going to allow members of council to ask questions directly to the OPS staff. I hope you all agree with that. It's outside our rules of procedure, but these are extenuating circumstances, and I know that members of council do receive a lot of inquiries from their constituents when this kind of spike in gun violence occurs. So I'm going to be lenient about that today. Item number 4, the update on the OPS violence against women strategy. We're going to hold this item. We have a presentation as well as a public delegation, Councillor Kavanagh. Item number 5, the presentation on OPS de-escalation training. We're going to be holding that item. Item number 6, feedback regarding proposed regulations under the Community Safety and Policing Act 2019. There's some recommendations there. Is this item carried?
Carried.
Carried.
Thank you. Item number 7, procurement related to community engagement process. Any questions or comments? Carried?
Carried.
Carried.
Thank you. Item number 8, reappointment of special constable or CMP. Questions or comments? Is the reappointment carried?
Carried.
Thank you. Item number 9, corporate telephone system upgrade. Is this item carried?
Carried.
Carried. Item number 10, 2020 to 2022 Equity, Diversity and Inclusion Action Plan update.
Chair, I will have a question if this can be held on.
We can hold that. We'll hold item number 10 and return to it. Item number 11, Workforce Management Report, first quarter 2021.
I have a question, Chair, if we
Okay,
can
so
hold
we'll
that in a
hold that.
comment. Thank you.
Okay. Item number 12, Financial Status Report, first quarter 2021 and draft 2022 budget process. Any questions? Member Smallwood has a question, so we'll hold that item. Item number 13, Performance Report, first quarter 2021. Any questions or comments? Seeing none, is this item carried?
Carried.
Thank you. Item 14, Response to Inquiry 1-21-09, Statistics related to mental health calls for service. Is this report received?
Received.
Thank you. Item 15, Response to Inquiry 1-21-10, Wait times and fees associated with the Municipal Freedom of Information and Protection of Privacy Act. Received?
Received.
Received.
Item 16, Response to Inquiry 1-21-11, Coach Officer Requirements and Training in Advance of Appointment. Member Smallwood, you have your hand up. Did you want to hold that item? Yes. Okay, that item is held. Item number 17, Response to Inquiry 1-21-12, Pre-charge diversion follow-up to 1-20-07. Is this item received?
Received.
Received.
Thank you. Item 18, Response to Inquiry 1-21-13, Fare Evasion and Enforcement of Fare Payments by OC Transpost Special Constables. Is this item received?
Received.
Received.
Received. Thank you. Item 19, Outstanding Board Inquiries and Motions, May 2021. Received?
Received.
Received.
And item number 20, Letters of Commendation.
Received.
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 Okay. Thank you. Now we'll return to item number 1, which is the chair's verbal report. I wanted to begin by taking a moment to discuss the recent spike in gun violence over the last week in Ottawa. I am saddened that 4 people have lost their lives in these senseless murders, and 1 person has been critically injured in an attempted murder. Many families are forever changed, and anxiety in our community is understandably heightened. I know that this increase in violence causes concerns for residents in Ottawa who are worried about their safety and the safety of their families. We need to do more to ensure community safety and well-being and to prevent against future incidents like the ones that have occurred over this past week. This needs to go beyond policing and should involve greater investments in the safety and well-being of our community, such as investing in greater levels of programming for youth to reduce risk factors associated with gun violence. The City of Ottawa statistically remains one of the safest cities per capita in Canada. I think that's a fact worth noting after the events of the past week. As always, I encourage anyone in the public to contact the police pardon me, with any information that they may have that could assist. Generally speaking, if you see something, say something. You may just have a missing piece of the puzzle. Chief Slowly and Inspector Cartwright from the Major Investigations Branch will be providing an update about the shooting trends and the recent homicides at today's board meeting. I want to take this opportunity to thank the women and the men of the Ottawa Police Service who work hard every day to keep our community safe. I would now like to discuss the development of the mental health response strategy. As some of you may be aware, last week I brought forward a motion to Ottawa City Council requesting that the General Manager of Emergency and Protective Services, under the umbrella of Community Safety and Wellbeing Plan, take the lead to develop a community mental health strategy as soon as possible. The motion emphasized that this strategy should be developed collaboratively with relevant stakeholders, including the Ottawa Police Service and the Ottawa Mental Health Strategy Guiding Council, Ottawa Public Health, relevant city partners, healthcare and hospital partners, and social services community stakeholders. My colleagues, Councillor Luloff and Councillor Eglai, brought forward a referral motion asking Council to refer this matter to the City Manager to review in consultation with relevant parties and report back to Council in Q3 of 2021 with a recommended path forward to coordinate the City's future efforts with those currently underway by the Ottawa Police Service. I was pleased to support this motion of referral because it involves the City Manager taking a leadership role in developing a plan to ensure that, moving forward, there is greater coordination among stakeholders in the development of a mental health strategy. This was the purpose of the motion that I brought forward, to position the city as the lead coordinator in bringing together the relevant stakeholders to develop an integrated, comprehensive mental health strategy. The city is well placed to play this role as it has strong connections to many of the other stakeholders and can help to ensure that they are at the table and that their voices are heard. As you all know, the development of a mental health response strategy is a key initiative under the Ottawa Police Service's change agenda. The service and the board are committed to advancing this work in a way that is coordinated and collaborative. While the Ottawa Police Service needs to have a seat at the table in a coordinated response, let me be clear, they should not be seated at the head of the table, nor do they want to be. For this strategy to be effective, it needs to involve all relevant players and must be developed in collaboration with members of the community with lived experience, as well as mental health experts and community organizations. Each of these perspectives is necessary to developing a strategy that will help us achieve our objectives of establishing a more integrated response that will provide the mental health supports that members of our community in all their diversity need. Many stakeholders across the city are already doing fantastic work on mental health response, including the Guiding Council. This is all the more reason why we need to ensure that the work these groups are doing is coordinated without a duplication of efforts. We need a one city response for an issue that impacts the city as a whole. On another topic, the Ministry of the Solicitor General has requested stakeholder input on several proposed regulations under the Community Safety and Policing Act. These include suspension without pay and a review and revision period for community safety and well-being plans. The Executive Director of this board has brought forward a report with proposed recommendations for the board to send to the ministry. I would take this opportunity to once again call on the province of Ontario to declare in force the sections of the Community Safety and Policing Act that are necessary to provide chiefs of police or police services board with the discretion to suspend a member of the police service without pay who is charged with or convicted of a serious offense. The ministry has proposed 4 years as the time period for the municipalities to review and revise as needed their community safety and well-being plans. The feedback recommended to the board on this proposed regulation is that a shorter review period is required to ensure the flexibility to respond and adjust to new and emerging issues and to course correct when needed. I would also like to take this moment to acknowledge the Ontario Police Memorial and Police Week. At the start of the month, the Ontario Police Memorial Ceremony was held. This ceremony honors those who lost their lives in the course of their duties as police officers. It was also Police Week earlier this month from May 9th to the 15th. The theme this year was working together to keep our community safe. I want to take a moment in recognition of these events to thank all of the members of the Ottawa Police Service who continue to dedicate themselves to serving our community. I also want to thank the leadership team who carries the service through this ongoing period of change, challenge, and opportunity. I'd now like to share an update on the CAO recruitment process. The board's recruitment for a new Chief Administrative Officer was officially launched on May 13th. We are accepting applications until June 10th through Odgers Bernston, the search firm we retained to assist us with this search. The board anticipates conducting interviews in July. We hope to have someone in the position as soon as possible following the interviews and the board's selection of a final candidate. As we look to welcome a new leader to the Ottawa Police through our CAO search, we also must bid farewell to another. Today is the last working day for Acting Deputy Chief Mark Ford after 33 and a half years of service. Mark, I want to thank you for all of your contributions at the OPS and in the wider community. I wish you all the best in your retirement and in your future endeavors. And I know I speak on behalf of the whole board for saying a very sincere thank you for an incredible career with Ottawa Police. Are there any questions or comments?
Chair,
Member Nerman?
yeah, thank you. Thank you, Chair, for a well-articulated report. And I would like to join you to personally thank Mark for his services. During my 2 years of stint, I had an introduction. I found him to be a great guy, great individual to be working with, and a great, very forthright and honest. I wish him all the success, and I'm very sure that it will be a loss to the OPS, but again, for the other organizations, he will be lending his hand to. So all the best, Mark.
Thank you, Member Nerman. Any other questions or comments on my verbal report? Seeing none received.
Received.
Thank you. So we'll now move to item number 2, the Chief's verbal report. Chief Slowly, over to you.
Merci beaucoup, Chair Deans. Thank you very much. I really appreciate all of your comments. An excellent report. I will speak to Mark Ford a little bit later in my comments. Thank you especially for recognizing the Police Memorial and Police Week, and thanking all of the members of the Ottawa Police Service for their work. Publicly recognizing that is something important to our members, and doesn't happen nearly enough in any forum, and often is absent even from these forums. So thank you for that. Chair, this has been a very tragic and difficult period for Ottawa and the Ottawa Police Service. The recent gun violence has resulted in too many young lives being needlessly lost, too many families grieving and suffering, too many people who are fighting for their lives in hospital, too many community members in too many neighborhoods who are fearful for their safety, too many paramedics and hospital staff who are involved in heroic medical efforts to manage the victims, as well as to provide support for their families, all the while still battling COVID. Too many OPS members themselves who've had to manage the significant stress and troubling trauma related to these shooting events, from dispatching the 911 calls to responding to actual in-progress violent crimes, to managing multiple horrific crime scenes, to investigating complex multi-jurisdictional cases, to providing immediate and ongoing victim services, to providing community supports in the days after the actual events themselves. The map you're looking at is a list of all of the shooting events that have taken place in the city year to date. You're going to get a much more detailed presentation on the stats this year and as they compare to previous years later on. There were several instances over the weekend where our officers arrived at these shooting scenes in time to attempt first aid and to provide CPR for the victims. Some of the efforts by our officers were successful and saved lives. Others tragically were not. All of these efforts took a huge toll on our members. This type of violence is simply unacceptable. We all know that this level of violence is not the result of a simple set of circumstances, nor will it be solved with simple solutions. It is the result of a number of societal failures, which ultimately leads to crime and violence. The members of the Ottawa Police Service remain committed to being part of a larger whole of city effort to improve the social determinants of health, to address the root causes of crime, to improve community safety and well-being, especially for those places and those people who are most affected by these crimes, Ultimately, we must all work together to find new solutions to reduce and prevent the type of violence we have just experienced. That said, the Ottawa Police Service knows that we must take the lead in responding to this major spike in gun-related violent crime. That is why the Ottawa Police Service has escalated our response to this public safety threat. We're in the process of finalizing a major operational plan to address the current wave of gun violence. This includes a deeper analysis into all the elements behind the crimes, as well as immediate plans for violence suppression, crime prevention, and integrated investigations. We will be vigorously pursuing prosecutions and incarceration for all those persons responsible for these violent crimes. I have full confidence that our homicide unit, guns and gangs unit, and drug unit will work in even greater levels of coordination to solve these crimes. In fact, we have already issued Canada-wide warrants for the 3 suspects in Friday evening's triple shooting, double homicide. There will be more announcements and more arrests to follow. Immediately following my update, the board will receive a full presentation from Inspector Carl Cartwright with additional details of the crime analysis and the operational plan. We have much more to do as a service, as a city, and as a society to truly address gun-related violence. While the police will always play a major role in assessing and addressing these and other complex crime problems, we know that there must be an expanded role for civil society, community stakeholders, academia, and the not-for-profit sector in developing new solutions to this old problem. We will be at the table to help support such efforts. Only through our combined, committed, and coordinated efforts will we be able to make any real sustainable progress. Chair, I want to now join you in congratulating a good friend and a member of the command team for the past year. This month, the member who exemplifies those qualities of integrity, compassion, teamwork is leaving our service. I want to take a moment to congratulate and celebrate Acting Deputy Chief Mark Ford, who will be leaving us at the end of June. He is on his official last working day. He will be greatly missed. Mark started his career as a constable with the Ottawa Police Service in October 1987. Since then, he has made a strong and lasting impact on our community and our membership. He has been a leader in emergency planning and tactical operations at the local, provincial, and national levels. He has mentored many officers. He has been a catalyst for change, and he has formed a host of truly effective police and community partnerships. This image you have here is Mark actually addressing the last recruit class that we hired and sharing his years of wisdom with that next generation of police officer. His father, retired Chief Brian Ford, was a pioneer in developing diversity within our service, and his son Mark has rightly followed in his father's footsteps, spending countless years working in the community to develop a broader and more inclusive approach to policing. Mark believes in respecting everyone, regardless of position in society or rank in the service. In return, he is well respected by community leaders, peers, and subordinates alike. His contributions to the well-being of our members were immense, and his collaborative leadership style will be missed. Thank you, Mark, for your service. God bless you in all of your future activities, you and your family. Chair, with Mark's departure, we have made some changes on the command team and our senior leadership team that I want to share with the board. My command team now consists of a group of leaders with a wide range of professional experience and personal lived experiences. Replacing Mark will be Jamie Dunlop. As Acting Deputy Chief, Jamie will lead the Community Policing Command. Jamie has been engaged with the community for much of his career, particularly the Indigenous community, where he has fostered relationships and programs in relation to violence against women issues and youth issues, and continues today as our co-chair with our Indigenous subcommittee of the Community Equity Council. Joan McKenna will continue in the role of Acting Deputy Chief in charge of the Intelligence, Information, and Investigations Command. And Deputy Chief Steve Bell will continue in the role as Chief Administration Officer. This command team will remain in place until the board completes its search for the new Chief Administration Officer. Mark's retirement also created a permanent vacancy at the rank of Superintendent. I would now like to announce that we have promoted Superintendent Trish Ferguson to the rank of Superintendent. She will be in charge of all frontline policing. Trish has a strong operational background. She has a long history in investigations. She is an EDI champion who co-founded the Women's Employee Resource Group. Perhaps most importantly, she has great empathy and great compassion. One of my commitments as chief was that the Ottawa Police Service would recruit, develop, and promote qualified, diverse, and effective workforce. As you know, our last recruit class included the highest quality, quantity, and diversity of any previous class. There were 48 new recruits, with 40% self-identifying as female, 50% self-identifying as racialized, and 6% as Indigenous. We are also seeing similar levels of diversity and quality in our most senior ranks. The command team and senior leadership team is now the most diverse in OPS history, with women representing 26.3% of the executive command and SLT roles combined. 5% of those roles are now filled by Indigenous members. Additionally, members of visible minority communities currently represent 21% of the command and senior leadership team positions. These statistics are based on perception and including acting positions and members on leave or absent for other reasons. There has definitely been progress in the quality and the diversity of the Ottawa Police Service at all levels. And now I want to talk about some of the excellent work by our Ottawa Police Service members. Our efforts to advance equity, diversity, and inclusion in the OPS is also helping to improve the ability to deliver community policing. It's about the work that happens every day by our members working in our neighborhoods and with our community. In the past month alone, our members have been called to manage 42 different demonstrations and protests. We've revived 8 people in overdose situations using the lock zone. We have managed 56,000 people traveling between the interprovincial bridges, and we've investigated 36 robberies, laying charges in 7 of those incidents. We are not superheroes, but the work we do every day matters. We are there at your worst moment to help you, to help your family, and to help make things right. There are many good days and some tragic weekends like the one we just experienced. Yet every now and then we hit it out of the park, and every day our members are out there in the community doing their best to help make this city safer. One of the calls that made headlines in the last month and gained a lot of international media attention was the attempted abduction of a newborn from an Ottawa family in May. This was a terrifying moment for the mother and the family involved. A woman had previously contacted the new mother over Facebook. She arrived at the home and attempted to grab and leave with the newborn. She used bear spray to fend off the mother and fled. Officers arrived to find the neighbors and located the woman. Neighbors had helped the officers to actually detain the suspect and return that child safely to her family. Our officers worked immediately and in concert with the local community to avert a real tragedy. We've also been involved in a very difficult and long-standing investigation into a historical sexual assaults in one of our schools. It's a very difficult and disturbing case involving more than 50 sex-related charges that were laid against an Orleans area teacher. I want to thank all of the young people who came forward to the investigators to report these crimes. It took a lot of courage on their behalf, and we take their trust in us seriously. I also want to thank the entire investigative team, particularly the lead investigator, Renee Stewart. A complex case like this takes experience, professionalism, teamwork, and compassion. Charges against the second teacher will also be laid. Last week, our 911 call center received a call from a concerned person about a young teenager in an apartment with a man. This young person appeared to be in need of protection. A detective, Admir Minaroli, took the call and he attended the address. Admir was met at the door by a naked resident and found the young boy clothed but in an unconscious situation on a couch. The man was arrested and charged. The child taken to CHIO, where they discovered that he'd been given marijuana and an unknown drug. The immediate intervention of Officer Admir Minaroli probably protected this child against significant threat and harm. Our investigation into this case continues. Next, I want to talk about our Marine unit. They have a tough job. We call upon them to keep our waterways safe through enforcement, education, rescue, and community engagement. In early May, they launched a drowning awareness campaign because sadly each year we hear of stories of those who have lost their lives due to unsafe conditions or unheeded safety precautions. On May 22nd, our Marine Dive team conducted a water ride campaign aimed at raising public awareness around safe boating practices and reminding boaters not to drink and boat. or to do any water activities after consuming alcohol or drugs. But even as these campaigns were underway, there were calls for the search of a young man who fell into the rapids of Hogs Back Falls. The team spent days searching the Rideau River. Unfortunately, this young person lost their life. As a reminder, if you're swimming, boating, paddling, boarding, or kayaking on open waters, or even just enjoying the open waterway systems nearby, please be safe. And my thanks to the MDT team. This past week, our traffic safety program geared it up to another level. An unaccompanied G1 driver in his mother's car was spotted by our traffic team on Fisher Avenue, driving more than double the speed limit. The car was impounded and their license was suspended. This is just an example of what our officers and residents are reporting on our roads and our response to those reports for unsafe traffic activities. The team has relaunched Project Noisemaker, a campaign focused on aggressive drivers, speeding, and noisy mufflers. Already this spring, in conjunction with Canadian Road Safety Week, our traffic unit have issued hundreds of charges, including more than 1,270 Highway Traffic Act offenses, 35 of which were stunt driving. This past weekend alone, our officers laid 9 stunt driving charges. The Noisemaker campaign has been very successful across the city, with residents writing to let us know how much they appreciate this important work being done. Here is an example of one letter we received. Other officer safety campaigns for cycling and e-scooters have also been launched. Now I want to talk about youth outreach and the soccer ball initiative. As a young kid, soccer was a big part of my life. It taught me a lot: how to work hard, how to work as a team, how to have self-discipline, and how to set goals. It made me feel like I was part of a community. For 17 years, Acting Staff Sergeant Vera has been coordinating an 8-week soccer camp, teaching local kids in underserved neighborhoods how to play the sport. This program is run by the Ottawa Police Service volunteers from across the service who work with kids to help them learn not just about soccer, but teamwork and life skills as well. This year, Acting Staff Sergeant Vera reached out to the Ottawa Soccer United Club to see if they would gather up supplies to help kids citywide to have the tools to play. Ottawa South United Soccer Club reached out to their community and purchased 250 soccer balls and 200 pairs of sports cleats. Staff Sergeant Vera then connected with partners at the Ottawa Catholic Centre for Immigration to identify families that could use the soccer cleats and new soccer balls. Over the course of May, frontline patrol officers, neighborhood resource officers, school resource officers, and community police officers helped Acting Staff Sergeant Vera deliver these items to exciting kids in some of our high potential but high needs communities. Last but not least, I want to reference the Community Commendations Board report. Although it was received, I want to be able to present these commendations in a new way. Every month, we include the board with a report of a list of community commendation letters outlining some of the good work done by our members. I usually read these out loud, but at this point, I want to actually let you hear one of these reports in terms of how they were recorded by the community member themselves. Our visual operations section has been asking some of the letter writers to lend their voice to the written appreciation of our members. I think this is a great new initiative and will provide greater insights for the board and the public to understand the impact that our members have on people's lives. If we could play the recording. Unfortunately, the technology is letting us down. The actual volume is not coming in, but the words are being displayed on the screen. Looks like we're going to attempt one more time. Hopefully the tech will support us this time. Okay, best laid plans of mice and men. Unfortunately, won't be able to hear the recording, and I know we're pressed for time on a full agenda. I do again encourage the board and the public to review the long list of commendations. They cover a very wide range of interventions by our members. They're just a few examples of the type of work that we do every day. These hardly ever make the news, but they're all trust-building events, and some are in fact life-changing events. They represent the myriad of daily actions by OPS members, which show their compassion, caring, and occasionally their heroic qualities. Thank you very much, Chair. Merci beaucoup.
And thank you very much, Chief, for a very comprehensive presentation. Are there any questions or comments? And I know members of council, some of them have been asking to speak. I'm allowing members of council to speak to the next item on the agenda, and we'll recognize members of council after Inspector Cartwright's presentation. So board members, are there any questions? Member Nerman.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks, Chief, for a well presentation and the details going forward. So I have a brief comment, and if you can enlighten me. Of course, these shootings which have been happening in Ottawa are very concerning to all the residents, and our elected councillors will be speaking on that later. Can you share with the board, if that is not an operational issue, these shooting incidents relate to the existing gangs or the groups from within Ottawa or from outside Ottawa?
Thank you, Member Nerman. Chair Deans, with your permission, if we could ask Member Nerman to raise that question after Inspector Cartwright's presentation. It may be answered in the presentation, but happy to get into it at that point.
I am fine with that.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments for the chief on his verbal report? Seeing none, received?
Received.
Thank you. Okay, we'll turn now to OPS response to gun violence. Chief, I will turn the floor over to you and you can introduce Inspector Cartwright.
Thank you very much, Chair, Board. Obviously, the events of the weekend and over the last several weeks have raised concerns rightfully across the city. I have Inspector Cartwright, who is here to represent a great deal of work from across the entire organization in providing an analysis, operational analysis of the year-to-date threat that we've seen and provide you with a framework of the operational response that we are currently putting in place. There'll be more details as the plan develops, but at this point, I'll turn things over to Inspector Carl Cartwright. Carl, go ahead, please.
Thank you very much, Chief, Madam Chair, members of the board. Hopefully there are no technical issues and you can hear me. Perfect. Now, I do not have control over the presentation. Inspector Maloney, thank you very much. If you just go to slide 2, that'll be great. I will begin from there. In light of the recent event, it was very timely, Madam Chair, for this presentation. And my intent is to give you an overall view of what is happening in our city. And Member Nerman, I will be answering your question. If not, remind me to answer it at the end of the presentation. When we're looking at shootings in the city of Ottawa, first of all, we need to really define what we're speaking of. I say this because data and analysis is gathered by different organizations differently. Shooting for the Ottawa Police Service is considered any incident where a firearm has been discharged legally, regardless of injury to persons or damage to property. So when we do go through the data, the data doesn't indicate the number of people who have been shot or the injuries. Is whenever we deem where we have data that a real firearm or evidence exists that a firearm was discharged within the municipality of Ottawa, where it actually poses a danger. So if we may have an incident where somebody may have discharged a firearm outside, on our city limits, illegally hunting in an area, that really doesn't really translate to the community safety and the well-being of the community as we see it today. And that data is collected, but it will not be reflected in this data. Some of the organizations may only gather data where somebody's injured as a shooting, but we take an overall look because it's very important to us if somebody discharges a firearm in a pathway in Orleans and we just happen to find a shell casing, that in itself is a concern to us and we do collect that data. In 2020, we did have a 5-year low in shootings. We had 45 documented shooting incidents in the city, and also we only had 3 victims of firearms homicides in this year, and it's a year in homicides where we had 8 total homicides, unprecedented clearance rate of 100%. In 2021, what we're seeing is a great increase. We are of 169% from last year currently at the data, and that is accurate as of yesterday. So what it translates in where I have listed here is that we've had 35 shootings to date. 18 of those shootings included injuries. With no injuries, 11 with injuries, and currently we have 6 shooting-related homicides where we have victims. And so far, we've already seized 35 crime guns from the streets of Ottawa, and that's an effort through our NRT program, through some great work done by the frontline services and including our investigative units. What does that really translate to the city? Thank you. Next slide. This diagram really shows the vastness of the geographical areas, not only of the city of Ottawa, of the incidents what I've described. This map actually only shows 28 of the shootings. There are another 7 incidents that are included in another map, but to give you a better picture, we've chosen to show you this map. What this map indicates is that this is not an isolated incident. This is not a geographically focused incident. This really involves the entire city of Ottawa, from where the victims are locating, where the incidents are being reported. This shows you, of course, the majority, the area covered covers the majority of population of the city of Ottawa, but it covers everything from the south to the east, north, and west of us. So the geographical location is quite clear of what we're dealing with. When I go into greater detail, you'll see why that becomes very important in how we are responding to the incidents and how we're tackling the issue in the city. Many times, individuals refer to, okay, is this a South End issue? Is this a West End issue? Is this a central Ottawa issue? It's really a citywide issue. If you can go to the next slide, please. Before I start to this slide, I want to make it clear, because I've heard some comments. I want to state to you, Madam Chair, we don't have a gang war problem. We do not have a turf war problem in the city of Ottawa. Those type of labels really go back to the 1980s, when really there was this propaganda image of what gangs were like and what turf conflicts were like. That was very similar to the 1980s when we really referred to the war on drugs. We have stopped using such terminology when we're referring to the drug crisis. Similar, we're not looking at the evolution by using turf and gang war. It's not really taking into account the evolution of the problem. When we look really at the evolution of the problem, it's a very evolving. For several years now, since I have the opportunity to be in this role, we've had it, seen this evolve. Sorry, I'm going to change my slide so I can see a little bit better. And each city, not only in the province, but in the country, has its own little different dynamics. Ottawa is different than the GTA. It is different than Northern Ontario. It is different than Hamilton. It is very much different than Calgary, but there will be certain similarities to all cities. In Ottawa, and for a number of years, we've seen that our gangs, and gangs are, there's no, in the term gang, there's no unified term relating to gang, but gangs will all refer to 3 or more individuals involved in certain activity, usually criminal activity, where violence is involved. And we do have gang activity in the city of Ottawa. But what we're seeing is that it is very loosely related. Their allegiances, the ties, are very loose. They're not based on geographics. Some may be, and we may see that greater influence in geographic location in the GTA area, where we're not seeing that normally now in Ottawa. Also, ethnic, religious, or cultural ties, they're very loose. What we're seeing, we see a group of individuals involved in certain level of criminal activity, which we'll get into details a little bit, but dealing with firearms that is fueling, and now the firearm, with the availability of the firearm, it's fueling the violence. We also see an increase in illegal firearms. It still remains very much at the core component. We're not seeing a more violent city. We're seeing the violence translating to firearm activity because we have an increase in firearms. 20, 30 years ago, a lot of stabbings. Areas in the world where are less firearms, such as Great Britain, we have an edge weapon crisis where people are using that as a tool. Here we are seeing, because a lot of firearm violence, because we have an increase in availability of cheap firearms on our streets. And that is also with communication with the information that we're getting a lot of information on why people are using those firearms. Many times the word status comes into it. A lot of times the word of protection. They feel that they need to carry it for protection. And also protect themselves because of the involvement they're in and they fear retaliation. When I mean increase in firearms, when we look at illegal firearms, we have thousands and thousands of legally registered firearms in the Ottawa region. However, 77%, we are part of the FATE program. FATE program is a firearm tracing program in the province of Ontario. It's extremely successful, which does all our tracing. We send all our firearms that are seized there. The data has been consistent over the years. What we're seeing is increasing handgun availability over long guns. 77% of the crime guns that we deal with come south of the border. 23% of crime guns are sourced through Canada. That data over the years has always been around 70, 75, 80%, but the greater majority of the weapons we see come illegally. Most of all the weapons that come through our firearm examiner here in the Ottawa Police are sourced outside of the city. When we look also at the gang problem, there's a massive fluidity of their movement. What is now being, we are part of a provincial guns and gang strategy. When we meet as external partners, the term gang sprawl has come up. Gang sprawl really indicates a pattern that is clear in the province where individuals involved in that sort of activity that leads to street level violence, that involves the illegal trade of illegal substances or drugs, they will move from one jurisdiction to another. It's no longer we're going to stay within our own geographical location and we're going to do our deal and we leave Ottawa to the individuals in Ottawa. You'll see that allegiances are fairly not only loosely tied within the city of Ottawa, but they're loosely tied outside of the borders. So what happens in North Bay or Thunder Bay is just as clearly important to us as it is in the GTA, because members will travel where they can conduct their illegal activities. As a result, they will also commit their crimes outside of their jurisdiction. Impact. We see this impact in the spread of activities that you saw in slide number 3. Those activities are related to individuals within our own community, but they're also related to individuals who come into our community from one purpose or another, either to settle a dispute, to settle a debt, or to commit criminal activity within the city of Ottawa, and then they will leave. So as we look at this map that highlights the shootings, that data only shows you where it happened. A shooting in Alta Vista may not be related to Alta Vista at all. A shooting in the market area may not be related to the market at all, except for that where the meeting was scheduled or where a chance of opportunity where two rival members of two different groups would encounter one another and the incident of violence occurs. What we're also seeing because of this fluidity, and we've seen a recent trend, is where we're seeing what we call drive-by shootings. We are seeing shootings involving vehicles where individuals do not even stop, they see one another and shootings occur. The violence that we see, what is concerning to us is when a firearm is used, and especially in a mobile vehicle where individuals choose to discharge a firearm mobily, is the increase in violence to other, I would call innocents. People who are totally uninvolved may very well. We've been very lucky so far. I can state that most of the shootings, we have not had anything such as that. Most of our shootings have remained targeted where the individuals have known one another. What we're also seeing is that there's an increase where it's a vicious cycle, where our victims today may very well be our perpetrators tomorrow. And the perpetrators of today will be our victims. There's an increase in individuals involved in the drug trade stealing from one another. That is a big issue in conflict. And that results automatically in violent retaliation. It's a very deadly cycle, and we're trying to get ahead of that. And we're also seeing where the clients are stealing from the dealers. And the dealers choosing to keep their supply, because supply, there's a greater demand of the supply, they will choose to rip off the clients. So that is at the core of a lot of issues that we're seeing. And of course, we have the use of social media and numerous digital platforms that many of them we may not even be aware of, where those sort of criminal financial transactions are happening above and beyond the normal transactions that we see day to day. That translates to a lot of aggression that we're seeing now happening in our streets. So that's what our units are dealing with right now within the major investigative branch through the drug unit, the street crime unit, the guns and gangs unit, and also the homicide unit. So that is a lot of what is fueling what we see today. If you can flip thank you. What we've been able to put in place today, we've had to very much increase our suppression strategies. We've already put a number of initiatives in place where we've had high visibility of members from everywhere, from our frontline resource personnel, from our NRTs, even from our MDT unit on the water, just based on the intelligence information of where we believe certain individuals who are the most likely to participate in those activities will congregate. And at any time in the city of Ottawa, our intelligence has indicated to us you can have 280 members, persons of interest in the city of Ottawa that are involved in the drug trade who have easy access to firearms. We focus our strategy in suppression and prevention on those most likely to reoffend or to participate in offenses based on intelligent information, not only from the Ottawa Police, from our external partners, but also through Correction Services Canada, Probation and Parole, who continuously feeds us information on individuals who are about to be released into the city of Ottawa. So we are able to get that intelligence information and put suppression strategies in place. And we've very much increased that. We did a similar plan a couple of weeks ago. We are in the middle of we've already started a plan as a result of the increase in activity now, and providing that intelligence information to all our personnel. And that involves a very much a global view of what is happening, including the neighborhood policing, all within the community safety and well-being, managing under the Community Safety Well-being Directorate under Superintendent Rob Drummond right now, who chairs that, sharing that information to all our partners and putting specific strategies in place to tackle specific issues. We continue with the expansion of the NRT program, and the NRT program has been very crucial, working together with Guns and Gangs Unit to identify issues earlier in the west end of the city, and we've been very much successful in calming that situation with the activities and partnering with our community members and having that lead with the neighborhood resource teams. Investigative wise, the chief mentioned, it is very unfortunate, very tragic, the recent deaths by the use of firearms, but our investigations are proceeding well. The triple shooting, double homicide involving the Abdullahi family. We extend our greatest condolences to the family for having lost 2 of her sons. But very shortly, within 48 hours, we had our suspects identified, their roles identified, and Canada-wide warrants issued for their arrest. We're working very closely with our external partners within the province and within the country to locate those individuals and hopefully bring them to justice so the family can have some closure. We're working very closely with our new intelligence-led policing directorate, and that shareness of information and intelligence is ongoing. Behind the scenes, beyond the proactive, visible strategies that have already taken place, and you will see ongoing, there's a lot of the covert, not so much overt activities that are ongoing. This is not the format to share such information with you, but I can tell you that the intelligence directorate is heavily involved in the gathering of intelligence information internally and externally, and feeding that information to our front line and to the investigative units involved. Our homicide, late last year, the executive did improve in an unsolved homicide strategy. I bring this to your attention today because very much this unsolved homicide strategy that is ongoing clearly identified the trend that we're seeing, that vicious cycle that I indicated were all around racialized young men. Those are the young men that we're seeing that are targeting each other, but they're also the young men that are dying, unfortunately. So our strategy clearly identified over the past 12 years that many of our unsolved homicide were related to gun violence, and they were related to these young racialized males. So this strategy is currently in place and very much successful as feeding the intelligence information that we're seeing now. Beyond that, we're also communicating constantly with the Crown's office, provincially and federally, especially since we have another crisis, which is the opioid crisis, that's also driving some of the deaths in the city, but also because the drug trade is so central to what we're seeing, our own Crown's office in place. And we look at how can we look at pre and post charge diversion, any type of diversionary matters, okay, that we can expand to non-gang related activities. Our neighborhood officers are very involved in a Time for Change program, identifying those individuals, those victims that are involved, and hopefully reach out to them where they will take on the assistance to divert them away from that life. But I have to indicate to you that what we're seeing now is an atrocity, really, for the deaths that we're seeing. The individuals that we are currently pursuing through the unsolved homicide strategy, through homicides and guns and gangs, are individuals that have gone past that pre and post charge diversion program. They have committed some of the most heinous crimes that we have seen. And our intent right now is because they pose a threat to the city, we are going to increase our suppression in conjunction with our prevention strategies in order to bring those individuals not only to justice, but also able to reach out to those most impacted. It is those communities. We are currently, as I've provided to you, a snapshot of the shootings, of the 35 shootings in this map, also identify where's the impact, which are the communities most impacted. And that is something that we're also working on. That is the last slide that I have. We've kept the slides short because I do know there are some questions, Madam Chair, that most likely I'll be fielding today.
Thank you very much, Inspector Cartwright. We have one public delegation we're going to hear from first, so I will call Farhang.
Hello, can you hear me?
We can, Farnaz. You have 5 minutes. Go ahead.
All right. So the agenda item I wanted to speak on obviously was this presentation on gun violence today, because I know given those recent incidences that the upcoming discourse is going to be from the community to call for more enforcement and a police presence, despite the fact that we've been doing that for years and the cycle of violence just continues. Chair Deans, I know you are the chair of Crime Prevention Ottawa's board, and you know that what's being done in the name of prevention and gun violence in the city is programs like the Time for Change program that was just mentioned in the presentation, and that they're really disconnected and out of touch with the lived reality of the people who may be involved in street violence and harm. There's false reports that are written about these programs that honestly would never really pass as real research, because the way that the evidence is shown is just not a reflective of how good this program is or what it even does to actually address the structural issues that create this type of violence. You should also know that there's no real meaningful programs for youth that aren't always centered around criminalizing them and increasing surveillance around them in the name of youth programming and care. So there's things like post-incident tables, and I know that the people there are ill-equipped to actually support the community members and the traumatic events that they're dealing with, and also nowhere to be found to actually reach the community members that need them the most. And, you know, like I've heard today even that there's, you said that we need youth programs and we need to move past the police response. But then you also followed that up with, if you see something, say something, which is literally encouraging, once again, a culture of surveillance and to rat out community members. And I just don't know what is hoped like to be achieved with that kind of a thing. Is it more incarceration? Because how has that worked? Has moving people from like violence from the outside into a human cage that perpetuates and makes space for more violence ever actually decreased violence? Has it made the people who leave those institutions be better and safer community members? The same communities and friends and families who you are claiming to be sad for right now because they're, you know, grieving and mourning, those are also the same people who are going to be subjected to the violence of having a loved one criminalized and incarcerated. They're also the same people, as it was mentioned in that presentation, who are going to be at risk of being exposed to that violence. So if you are challenging outdated language, pushing back against the war on drugs, then why is the discourse in the presentation and like just online in these conversations still about criminalizing people who share and sell drugs, still about criminalizing people who are involved in these types of like violent acts and behavior? If we have a systemic analysis of things, why are we still then feeding the system that creates the space for this violence? Please stop choosing criminalization and incarceration as the approach to these issues. Stop reinforcing fraudulent programs that only work to expand the nets of incarceration and surveillance. These are all reactionary responses that are often coming out of a heightened fear-based response, which I totally understand. Like, I get that the community is full of anxiety and fear, but reactionary responses without that systemic analysis make for ineffective policy and responses. They're only setting up the community for more trauma and violence, and that includes cops. Like, you are also subjected to that same trauma and violence, but we're just continuing it. We can't in one way be sad about the lives lost and then ignore the trauma and violence that police themselves create for those community members as well. The discourse around the ambiguous label of gangs in the city is used to arbitrarily target so many people and youth in the city, in particular racialized youth. When Peter Slowly first got here, he had mentioned approaching the violence as a public health issue and referenced the Glasgow model. And yet there have been no efforts to show how the city plans on actually moving in this direction. The NRTs, which have been the only thing that have really been talked about in the past few months, and pushing for an increased police presence isn't really a public health approach. If you separate kind of whatever your intentions are, it's very clear that policing is always going to be an inherently violent and enforcement-based approach to any issue, but in particular this issue. I know Peter Slowly also referenced today in his presentation that his approach is including arrests, prosecution, and incarceration. And to be honest, that it makes it really clear that there is no room for something new. So the analysis from the presentation that we just heard honestly offers not much that is new, just in terms of like critiquing this idea that there are gangs in this city.
Arnesh, your time is up. If you could please wrap up.
Sure. So I just urge community members and anyone who is concerned about this issue to just think a bit more critically about the discourses, and just know that policing, prosecution, and incarceration isn't going to fix this violence. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions or comments for the delegation? Seeing none, that's the end of our public delegations. We do have a number of members of council who have asked to participate. I'm going to use the same rules that we use at council, which is 5 minutes total for questions and comments. So we'll start with Mayor Watson. Mayor Watson, are you on the line? If you are, can you unmute?
Yes, I am. Yeah.
Okay.
Just trying to get my camera on. Jay. Sorry. Camera. Make that full screen. Box right there. Great. Great. Thank you very much, Madam Chair, Vice Chair, Chief Slowly, members of the board, mesdames et messieurs. Let me join in the chorus of congratulations to Mark Ford on his well-deserved retirement. I had the honor, Mark, of working with your dad when he was chief for many years, and we wish you the very best and thank you for your service to the community. Members of the police board, the shootings and killings in our city that we experienced over the past week are both unacceptable and very troubling. At this time, of course, we think of those lives lost and individuals who have been injured. Les fusillades et les meurtres sont à la fois inacceptables et très préoccupants. Resolving disputes by deadly force is distressing to the whole city. From every measure, Ottawa is in fact a safe city, but when one sees the horrific actions that we witnessed in the last week, no one in the community feels safe. I have full confidence in our chief and his team, but the police and their presence alone is not enough to solve and prevent these crimes. We need the community to work with Crime Prevention Ottawa, Crime Stoppers, and the Ottawa Police Service, among others. We need you, members of the public, to step forward if you hear or have any information on these shootings or other crimes. Nous avons besoin de votre aide si vous avez de l'information sur les fusillades. Si vous entendez quelque chose, dites quelque chose. I'll just leave with, the chief with one question. We know that resources are stretched. You mentioned over 40 protests, increase in domestic violence calls, and of course, dealing with COVID. And I'm wondering if you're able to commit to further reducing the number of police officers on the Quebec border crossing, which I personally believe is wasteful of their time and effort and their safety, and get them back into the community, because as you mentioned, and as your officer who did a very good thorough report on the guns and gangs challenges facing our city, obviously having greater police presence in different pockets of the community would be very much needed and well received by members of the community. So I'm hoping that notwithstanding, we do have a provincial order with respect to the borders, and that's now been extended another 2 weeks. It's costing a lot of money. We know we're going to recoup that from the province. But it's taking those officers away. And even if some are on paid duty, they obviously can only work so many hours to be in the kind of shape they need to be to get out and do what I consider much more serious police work than preventing people from going over the bridge to Quebec and back again. Thank you. Merci.
Thank you. Mr. Mayor, Chief Slowly, did you want to answer that question?
Thank you very much, Chair. Mayor Watson, appreciate your comments, and again, fully supportive, particularly around the work of our members. Also grateful for your recognition of Acting Deputy Chief Mark Ford's legacy and that of his father as well. Mayor, as you know, we've continued to do literally a daily assessment of the interprovincial bridge operations. That is, in fact, has been led by Acting Deputy Mark Ford in full consultation with Dr. Vera Etches and the Ottawa Public Health. We have actually, since the very first 24 hours of operation, maintained a steady reduction in the resources, both on duty and pay duty, surrounding those operations, while still maintaining the spirit and the letter of the request to provide that level of interprovincial interdiction. We are down now to, I think, 4 hours a day in strategic rotations to provide some level of interdiction while having the most minimal impact on policing and the most optimal outcome on public health outcomes. We continue to do a daily review, and if any circumstances within our jurisdiction, including a crime pattern as we saw over the last several weeks, requires a further adjustment around those interprovincial operations, we will make that assessment. In fact, that is part of our assessment around resource redeployment as we're considering the overall operational plan. Hopefully that answers your question, Mayor, and thank you for your support of it.
Thank you for that. Appreciate it. Merci. Thank you to your officers.
Thank you, Mayor Watson. Our next speaker is Councillor Tierney.
Great. Thank you, Madam Chair. Most appreciated. I want to echo what Mayor Watson has said. Congratulations, Mark, on your many years of service. I really, today's presentation is a bit of an eye-opener. I think, the fact that the way things are changing, we have to adapt. And I know our force can do it, and I know they're going to bring people to justice that have committed these crimes. It was more, Chair Deans, I just wanted to thank the quick response, obviously having 2 homicides in my ward within a week, how quickly the police, the inspectors, and as a matter of fact, the chief got back to me to reassure me that this wasn't random. It's still not right, but it certainly gives a real sense to the community. And I think that's our role as councillors, is to be able to make sure that the public feels safe. And I spent the day yesterday in parks, very socially distanced, just gathering some feedback. And I think a lot of people recognize we live in safe communities. And it just, this is something that is bigger than just a local neighborhood. This is something from a city perspective. And I just wanted to thank the police for the great work that they've been doing. That's all today, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Tierney. Our next speaker is Councillor Cloutier.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I've just rejoined. Excellent. Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And Chief Slowly, Inspector Cartwright, thank you very much for the presentation. Thank you to the members of the Ottawa Police Service for your ongoing work. Chief Slowly, thank you for the call on Friday and your work by OPS on this crime. Madam Chair, thank you for your comments. I do agree that statistically Ottawa is indeed very safe, but statistics be what they are, these instances coming so quickly on the heels of one another is upsetting for residents, and they impact people and creates anxiety. Our neighborhood resource teams have been in place for several years and have done an outstanding job. And that is partially why the crime rate is down. But again, this these instances are upsetting. The chief assured me that they're putting in the resources, and our neighborhood resource teams are on the job. And I appreciate that the suspects in the Alta Vista shootings have been identified. Inspector Cartwright spoke about this not being a South End issue or a West End issue, it's a citywide issue. I agree. And he said that it's not a gang war or a turf war, but it sure does seem that way. As you referred to individuals coming into our community to settle a dispute, or you referred to Toronto and North Bay. And while we're perhaps not seeing more violence in the city, as you said, you did say that more guns are being used more often, and that's disconcerting because of the danger that poses to residences. You referred to drive-by shootings. So just a couple of questions. Are you able to provide any update about whether the crimes we've seen in our city are related to one another? Chief Slowly or Inspector?
Chair Deans, with your permission, I'll ask Inspector Cartwright to speak to that, and if I have any follow-up comments, I'll add them. Thank you.
Thank you.
Chief, Madam Chair, Mr. Cloutier, I can tell you that based on the information and all the intelligence that we've been able to gather, there is no, they are not interconnected. The recent incidents that you've seen, the recent rash or spike in shootings are not related to one another. We have individuals who have targeted one another for one reason or another. Most of the homicides, most of the incidents that we have, including this recent trend that we have seen, is clearly related to, and I stand by my earlier comment, there's no turf. Okay, there's no turf, and there's nobody fighting for a corner, a piece of the pie. That's not what it is. And we have, in all relationships, we have fractured relationships, and this is around fractured relationships when it comes to greed, when it comes to drugs, okay? When it comes to possibly some other, we've had some other motives also, where that has translated to where the two parties, in order to have a crime, the victim and the offender must have a nexus, and that nexus is a criminal activity behind it. I do understand the term gang, okay? I don't understand what it brings, but clearly, we're dealing with individuals who've been shot on the streets, okay? We're dealing with it. We're dealing with the worst of the worst cases that as police officers we can deal with in regards to when it comes to the threat to the community. So I'm not going to be apologetic, and I stand by the words that we do have a gang issue. We have a gang issue in North America. Ottawa is not limited to it. And we're seeing it, but it's very fluid. And my presentation today for Madam Chair and the board on behalf of the service is to give you a view of the landscape as it stands today. I hope that answers some of your questions, Mr. Cloutier.
Thank you. Yes, thank you very much. And Chief, you're not okay. You're not going to add anything. As you said, it's a complex and multi-jurisdictional issue. Absolutely. Are you able to provide the community with any context about how you're working with other police forces? The suspects in the recent shootings were identified, publicly identified as being from out of town. About how you're working with other police forces in the country and our province. Inspector Cartwright, you talked about North America, so that we could prevent and, when needed, solve these crimes.
Carl, do you want to?
All right, Chief, Madam Chair. We are part of a provincial guns and gangs strategy. Under Criminal Intelligence Services Ontario, CISO, we participate we are part of that, one of the sitting members. We are part of the intelligence gathering group. We share information with another. We are part of the Gang Net, which is a run from the GTA, which shares continuously information with another. One of the things that we need to break down, and we do that with our external partners, is that we realize that crime has no borders. Those individuals who are involved in those activities, borders do not matter to them, and that's what this presentation really should let you really get a good grips on. And we need to work with one another, and we do. We're part of the Provincial Weapons Enforcement Unit. We're part of the Biker Enforcement Unit. We have embedded members within all these multi-jurisdictional task force that continually work with one another. The recent Canada-wide warrants that were issued for the homicides, okay, that's going to go to our repeat offender unit, which is we have embedded members of the Ottawa Police, which is a provincial unit. They'll be actively involved in looking for those individuals and to bring them to justice. So that sharing information, that continuous work is ongoing. Our intelligence unit, that intelligence unit through Superintendent Drummond, they're involved even more national organizations, including Criminal Intelligence Services Canada, where online assessments are being done. Certain individuals in crime groups are actually assessed at their level of threat to the community. So we share in those programs, and when we participate in joint operations, there are certain criteria that have to be met within that risk assessment, and that is continuously being done. And we trust us that the Ottawa Police Service is embedded into those processes.
The only thing to add, Councillor Cloutier, and it was referenced in Inspector Cartwright's presentation, almost 80% of the guns, crime guns that we seize here in the city come across from the US. There's a great deal of work done between our investigative units, the provincial bodies that Inspector Cartwright referenced, and Canada Border Security Agency, CBSA, including our partners in the United States around trying to stop the flow of illegal guns across the border and into Eastern Ontario here in the city. So there are a wide range of local, regional, provincial, and international efforts that are ongoing to try to protect Ottawa, as well as conduct investigations and successful prosecutions in these matters.
Thank you, Chief. Thank you, Inspector. Just a couple more questions, Madam Chair. With respect to prevention, the Neighborhood Policing and Community Safety Wellbeing Plan speaks about the development of the youth strategy and the support for that in the City of Ottawa, and partnering with community stakeholders with respect to safe supply and injection sites and narcotics and drug treatment and all of those issues that are complex and interrelated. And I think that the focus on developing the youth strategy is critical and is required to curb this type of crime or gang engagement, if you will. What outreach, I'm concerned about the funding with respect to that there's no new money attached to the plan of the youth strategy. And can you speak to that in any way, and what outreach is being done with community partners with respect to being proactive and preventing adherence to a gang mentality, if I could call it that?
Thank you very much, Councillor. I'm going to call on Acting Deputy Chief Tammy Dunlop in just a second. There aren't any specific dollars assigned to the youth strategy at this point. However, going into the 2022 budget cycle, that will be one of the areas that we will consider allocating hard dollars and more specific resources to. There's a wide range of outreach activities that are already underway, and I'll ask Acting Deputy Chief Dunlop to speak to that if you can at this point, Jamie.
Yeah, sure, Councillor Cloutier. The youth strategy in terms of its development is taking a look at the Ottawa Police and everything we do that's youth, not just with our designated youth thought service or SROs or whatever it might be, but however youth may be coming in contact with the Ottawa Police through our patrol, potentially with the patrol officers or other ways, to ensure that our main goal, not being either diversion or referral, if assistance to the family, if that's required, is done consistently across the board. So we do work with outside agencies. It's not a program when it comes to diversion or the referrals that's done in-house. We work with youth working agencies such as the Boys and Girls Club, and from them as a coordinator also assisting us with a diversion program to other agencies that might be more culturally sensitive or things of that nature. And we're looking to expand on that in the future to ensure that any time a youth comes in contact with the Ottawa Police, for whatever reasons that they're dealt with consistently across the board from the perspective of first and foremost ensuring that they get the supports that they need as youth, be it through a diversion or just simply reference or also supporting the family. So it's ensuring that those references and diversion is going to be consistent across the board to lessen the police involvement actually in the youth's life.
Last thing to add to that, Councillor, we're in the process of posting and hiring a position, Director of Community Safety Wellbeing. This will be an individual who does not come from a policing background, but will come from a social services, mental health, addictions, youth outreach background, ideally local, so that they have a network that we can tap into. But they will take over under the guidance of Acting Deputy Dunlop. They'll take over the completion, implementation, and ongoing evaluation of that youth strategy. So again, we're looking to do things differently, bring in different capabilities, different experiences, different types of leaders into the organization who can extend our network and bring a wider variety of civil actors into that effort. Thank you for your question, sir.
Chief, thank you very much. Inspectors Dunlop and Cartwright, thank you very much. I appreciate your work. I appreciate the call I received this morning with the community police officers so that we could discuss and coordinate stakeholders in the community with respect to the events of this weekend. I appreciate the work of the Police Services Board and Madam Chair. I appreciate that you've accommodated councillors to ask our questions and to speak today. Merci.
Thank you very much, Councillor Cloutier. That being the end of the council delegations, I'll now open the floor for questions from board members. Are there any questions from members of the board? Start with Councillor King.
Thank you, Chair. And I really just had a follow-up from our colleague, Councillor Cloutier, around interdiction, around guns. I think that you answered the question that I would have naturally asked you, Inspector Cartwright, around that. But I was just curious about interdiction during COVID. Obviously, there is some restrictions around the borders right now. So I'm just wondering operationally, is that resulting in a reduction in a sense of what is either coming across the border or that which is being interdicted in terms of crime guns?
May I, Chief?
Carl, go ahead. I'll hit cleanup for you.
Councillor King, yes, what we've seen, and I can speak provincially and can also speak what we're seeing a little bit nationally, being part of those committees. During the COVID pandemic, we've seen an increase in demand for firearms. That is from the chatter and the monitoring that is being done online. That's also from looking at some of the seizures across the border. We have not seen a lesser demand. We have not seen a decrease in the trafficking. Now, when you look at the trafficking of firearms, that's it's really a federal issue. Ottawa, we're in a municipal organization, but we do have access to our federal and provincial partners, the provincial weapons enforcement team being heavily involved, which we have participation in. So we are aware of that. So COVID has not lessened the demand for illegal firearms. It's only increased it.
In addition to that, Councillor King, the demand has remained high, although there is some reduction in traffic across legitimate border crossings. Most of our firearms are coming not across legitimate border crossings, but across the world's largest undefended border. It also includes, quite frankly, the rapid expanse of parcel delivery, whether through Canada Post or other major private sector providers are shipping guns and parts of guns, ammunition across international borders on a regular basis in so many ways that are virtually undetectable. And last but not least, in my private sector days, we were actually supporting CBSA in their efforts to use AI to scan large quantities of shipping containers coming across international borders, again, containing a wide variety of illegal guns and munitions coming into and leaving the country. This is a wonderful, free and democratic society that shares the largest undefended border with the largest producer and consumer of firearms in the world, which makes our circumstances uniquely challenging.
Well, I definitely appreciate that insight from you, Inspector, and also from you, Chief. I think it adds a little bit more context to the questions that my colleague, Councillor Cloutier, was asking. So I very much appreciate it. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Member King. Member Sueda.
Thank you, Chair. And also I wanted to extend my congratulations to Acting Deputy Chief Ford. You know, you definitely did a lot of time and a lot of work for our community and for the service. So I want to congratulate you on that and best of wishes going forward. And I also want to thank Inspector Cartwright for a very great presentation, very detailed and informative presentation. I also want to build on a question that Councillor Cloutier brought up, and I think the public delegate also kind of alluded to. And Inspector Cartwright, you mentioned something about diversion tactics, trying to get, I guess I'm assuming you're trying to get people away from that lifestyle. And what kind of things can the OPS do with our various community groups to get individuals away from this lifestyle? And what are community groups saying about what's happening in this recent week?
Right, Carl, if you want to start, and maybe I'll also queue up Acting Deputy Chief Jamie Dunlop to speak to the community portion of things, which is more in his area of expertise. Go ahead, Carl.
Member Sueda, that is the million-dollar question, and of course you have to ask it. Very difficult. There's so many different social determinants of crime that we need to go back and look into. But clearly, this is an issue that we as police have limited impact, but need to still lead. The issue of looking into members and having access to those members who were at some time in the past, okay, involved in that lifestyle, what led them away from that lifestyle, doing the proper analysis of why people not only get into a situation where that leads them to certain activities, but also some of the conversations I've had with some of our external partners in the GTA is there's a lack of information. What prevents about all those individuals who grow up in the same environment but do not take part. There's a great focus right now, Member Sueda, of what leads people to that activity, but there's a lack of information or about people who have the same lived experiences, okay, but didn't take that choice. Okay, so the conversations that we're having, and those are very high level conversations, and how do we bring that forward? Unfortunately, by the time this comes to my attention upon my current role, those individuals have well moved on past that stage. But that doesn't mean I brought it forward, because it's always forefront in our minds that we still need to pay attention, because at many times, even in my career, I will see names and cross my desk that I dealt with as a patrol constable. At that time, the question is, where did we fail those individuals? Those individuals that may have been involved in very minor incidents, now involving greater incidents where even a life would have been lost. Where did we miss over the decades, over the 15 years? Where as society, OPS being a leading proponent in that society, where did we fail them? And that's where those conversations, I will leave it to Acting Deputy Chief Dunlop to sort of move forward with that. But those are the questions really when we speak to Superintendent Granger, myself, and other members of the community and some of our external partners looking at the anti-gang strategies is, where did we miss those steps? Where did we fail? Because we did fall. We did fail somewhere.
Jamie?
Thanks, Carl. Mr. Sueda. this all happened obviously over this weekend, so there's a lot of conversation going on currently within the community, and that is beginning to start directly in relation to these events. We have some community leaders looking to form some meetings and have discussions, and internally with the police, we're there to support those discussions in any way we can. What has to be done within a lot of the communities is that interaction and ensuring that there's wraparound services. It's not, we hear it many times, police can't solve this issue alone. But how do we interact, and how do we manage that? We've had, and sometimes the best way of doing that is some recent examples we may have been talking about earlier. I was talking about the youth and diversion, and what our youth diversion is, or pre-charge diversion is really what it is, and that's identifying a youth that may be involved in some level of criminal activity, and instead of putting them through that justice system, putting them through those type of areas, we instead refer them to community-based agencies, and we have them work directly with the family. First, work with the family, ensure whatever services or programs that this child may be referred to, it fits what the child needs, and as well as what the family, support the family and helping them through that. As well, we have NRTs that are constantly in the neighborhoods, and people often discuss what they do and how does that work and how is that connection happening. It's happening on kind of that face-to-face all the time, where we have NRTs, for example, that would who have referred someone who is struggling, involved in criminal activity. I think the chief may have brought this up as an example, I think over not long ago, where one individual gentleman involved in this activity, if you will, that violent activity at the street level, was injected and was arrested for offenses, but later discovering that the personal struggles that individual was going through led the NRTs to come back to him and work with them, simply because of that nature and the relationship they actually did develop. But the key part is then refer that individual and get other city partners involved in helping that individual for things that he required in order for him to be successful. And that included everything from education to potentially job placements and as well as care for the children that they have. So it's really about connecting those other services that are still being developed and becoming more robust within the city, but also making those connections that's where police can be involved due to our day-to-day locations within some of these neighborhoods, and dealing with the individuals who are finding themselves on this path, that we can, if they're ready, and that's always key, hopefully connect them away from us, but into social services and into other services that's going to be geared towards what they need to be successful, and hopefully leave a life that's leading to this violence that could potentially be also caused against them as victims. So that's how the community is beginning to kind of build around what the NRT program is, and each one of these neighborhoods is about making those connections with those community services in the area, and slowly, one by one, hopefully be able to divert, refer, or whatever is going to be necessary to help some of our youth not go down this path, and those that are as well, making sure the door is open. We have to respect. Often people get involved at a very young age and things change. We want to be able to have the door open for them to have a path out, and that's again connecting with the right services that's going to help them do that.
Thank you for the explanation. Just one more question regarding that. Do we have previous people that were involved in gangs who have come out of that lifestyle, talking to people that are currently in that lifestyle? Does the police service facilitate anything like that?
Member Swayde, thank you. In fact, we held an emergency command and senior leadership team meeting this morning to update the overall analysis of the challenge and the operational plan. And in fact, this was raised, we were pushing each other to look at different strategies, and this actual question that you just raised came up. I've actually asked Inspector Debbie Miller, who works underneath Acting Deputy Chief Jamie Dunlop, to consider how we could implement such a strategy using a former involved gang member, potentially someone who has lived in that criminal lifestyle, been involved in violent crime, been a victim or a victimizer in regards to violent crime, but because of their maturity and their current life cycle status, they're able to actually work in concert with social services and even the police service to provide interventions. We've seen that type of work done effectively in other jurisdictions in Canada, mostly south of the border. So there's a body of evidence-based research we can tap into and practice that we can customize here to Ottawa. But it will take community partners, it will take community trust, it will take what both the chair and the mayor talked about, Someone out there seeing someone doing something wrong or getting involved in risky activity and reaching out to us or a social service agency and engaging someone in an intervention. Doing nothing and saying nothing will only perpetuate the problem. We are one of those resources. We don't hold ourselves as to be the exclusive resource. But if we do get that type of outreach, we will try to get that type of intervention for that individual and their family. Thank you very much. Excellent question.
Thank you, Chief, and Inspector Cartwright and Aki Deputy James Dunlop. And I look forward to hearing if this program or if we can move forward with something like this. Thank you very much. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Member Sueda. I might just add, as Chair of the Crime Prevention Ottawa organization, that we do, in conjunction with John Howard Society, run a gang exit strategy program. Member Smallwood.
Thank you very much, Chair. I want to start, as others have, and just express my appreciation to Acting Deputy Mark Ford. I've enjoyed working with him over the years, and I particularly wanted to thank him and applaud his work with his volunteer activities with the community. I know that I often got calls from him asking to help out on various things he was involved with, and I really appreciate that, and do look forward to continuing to see and speak to him in the future. With respect to this, Councillor King asked the question I was going to ask, so I'll just make a comment. I think this really, for the board, highlights one of the big challenges we face, especially when we're dealing with the budget. You can see, and it's certainly understandable, how the communities have been impacted by these recent events, and the demand for a timely and fulsome response by the police services, and making sure that they have adequate resources to do that. And at the same time, we're challenged with supporting the chief in his long-term vision of diverting some of the resources so that we can support and provide support to other actors in the community who are better placed, as many have told us over the years, better placed to deal with some of these upstream issues. So I think at this time wanted to reiterate the support, my support, certainly to the chief, and my understanding of the difficulty that he faces with these competing demands, and I think he's doing an excellent job of trying to keep both in balance as we move forward, never losing sight of our longer term goal in the community safety and well-being plan. So that's it. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Member Smallwood. Anyone else? Seeing none, received on the report? Received. And thank you again, Inspector Cartwright, for a very comprehensive report. We appreciate it. We'll move then to item number 4, update on the OPS Violence Against Women strategy. And Chief Slowly, I'll ask you to introduce this item.
Thank you very much, Chair. As pressing and as demanding as the previous topic of gun violence is, long-standing is violence against women. Unique characteristics, again, equally differently, but equally challenging for a police service. Again, one that we cannot do on our own and must do in and with community. And we're extremely grateful for strong community partners who have helped us to continually improve our services, our thinking, our attitudes, and our police service operations in regards to this. This would be another area to thank Acting Deputy Mark Ford in his tenure as the VAW executive sponsor. He was able to really accelerate this, rebuild in some cases relationships, build new relationships, and is turning over a well-run machine to Joan McKenna's executive sponsorship. But this presentation will be done by Inspector Heather Lachine primarily, who is the point person for the service in connection with the VAW community here in Ottawa. And again, you're going to see progress based on lessons learned, some of them tough lessons learned, and a commitment to continual improvement. So with that, I will turn things over to Inspector Lachine for the presentation.
Thank you, Chief. Can everyone hear me?
We can.
Okay, thank you. Technology is working, so that's a good sign. I'll just wait, I think. There we are. Thank you. Madam Chair, members of the board, thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to present on the update on the Violence Against Women strategy. You can go to the next slide. So just a quick overview. I'm going to discuss the VAW Senior Advisor position, the Indigenous Women's Safety Advisor position. I'm going to give a quick overview on the VAW priorities and the work that has currently been done to date and the next steps, and a quick update on some other work. I also just want to quickly take the opportunity when I came into this position and I was given this portfolio, the strategy, taking the lead on this. Acting Deputy Chief Ford was my executive sponsor, has been my executive sponsor. And I really just want to thank him. His support has really helped us get us to the point that we are today. And I am so very appreciative of his work, his time that he's given to me and the work that he's done with me. We've worked very closely. So thank you very much, Mark. You're going to be very missed in the organization and definitely by me. So an update on the VAW Senior Advisor position. The name changed a few times for this position. This job description that was developed, we received funding for, budgeted for a new position in our organization based on the seriousness and the priority of the violence against women. And this job description was really driven by the community. We have had numerous community consultations around this. A task team was developed that came specifically from the advisory committee that we are involved in. I'm the co-chair on. And we worked with a smaller group to develop an initial draft and then took that back to the advisory committee. It was also had a lot of consultation internally in our organization with Isabel Granger from the Respect, Values and Inclusion, and also with our EDI specialist. It continued to go back and forth with the advisory committee, making updates, and then went to the greater sector as well. I'm happy and proud to say that the job description has been finalized and is currently gone for translation. And I am now working with our advisory committee to develop a panel for the interviews. The goal is to have the panel consist of 2 community members and 1 Ottawa Police member. And as far as next steps go, hoping to do the interviews for this position at the end of June. Next slide, please. The Indigenous Women's Safety Advisor position, the initial consultation, we met with some members of our Indigenous community, including our violence against women community. And it was decided at that time, what was learned at that time, that this position the consultation wouldn't necessarily be the same for this position, that more was needed with respect to our consultation with our community. There was a shift in the title. Initially, this position was to be called the Missing Murdered Indigenous Women and Girl Advisory position, but the Indigenous community is moving away from using those terms for that. So we had a shift in the title. I'm just going to take a sip of water. After the initial consultation, we met with some members of the Ottawa Aboriginal Coalition, and it was decided that what was required was a work plan to be put in place to move forward with this position. The OAC met separately after and came back to us with some suggestions, some excellent suggestions, and we are moving forward with bringing Shirley Cuillerier into our organization. She is a retired assistant commissioner with the RCMP, and she was a senior advisor on the reconciliation and the National Inquiry in Missing Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls. So Shirley will be a bridge between the community and the Ottawa Police Service. And with this, there will be, starting in June, an Indigenous Women's Safety Table, and the Ottawa Police and Shirley have been invited to sit at that table, and we will move forward working together with the goal of creating a safe system to have this position created to work within the Ottawa Police Service. Next slide, please. So just to go over a few violence against women priorities and work to date, there were a number of priorities identified. The chief met with the community over 2020 on three different occasions, in March, in September, and then again in December. And a number of priorities identified, first being the Indigenous peoples, prevention, response, survivor support systems related to missing, murdered Indigenous women and girls. And so as a result of that, the Indigenous Women's Safety position came out, and I am currently as well engaging with the various Indigenous communities to identify how we can move forward with respect to changes within our organization training to better respond to young Indigenous females who have experienced trauma. Also, a second priority is the OPS accountability and transparency. I'll speak to the violence against women advocate case reviews that came into, we started doing those in 2018. We continue to do these. These case reviews provide the opportunity for our community partners and advocates to review cases, both sexual violence and domestic violence, and identify potential issues and bring them back to us and have a feedback loop and discuss what trends that they're seeing, what issues they're potentially seeing, which we can then make changes and improvements, all with the intent to improve services to victims of sexual and domestic violence. The action recommendations from the mandatory charging report in 2015 goes back quite some time. This is ongoing and continuous, and it's with respect to identifying where we can improve training, improve information provided in our domestic violence investigator course, our sexual assault response officer course as well, and any other training to our frontline members. Another priority was to improve response with respect to culture and language. The language with, or the issue with French language in the VAW community has been ongoing for many, many years. We are currently working on policy changes and training to ensure that active offers of French language service are given at calls for service. And this is particularly with, well, we have brought together a number of areas within our organization. The communication center, for example, the police reporting unit, a number of different areas of frontline, and identifying where we can improve to ensure that members who are in crisis receive an active offer in their first language, and if it's French. And we are working with Immigrant Women's Services of Ottawa as well, and identifying where we can improve within the organization to have consistent translation, or sorry, consistent interpretation services offered to victims of sexual and domestic violence who are in crisis. And we are also engaging with Nissa Homes, which is new to the city of Ottawa. And this is a Muslim women's shelter and it's not solely for Muslim women, but it serves Muslim women, and engaging them as well to be involved in our advisory committee. We are also, today marks the last day of Sexual Assault Prevention Awareness Month, and we have been working with our partners with the Civic Hospital internally with our Ottawa Victim Support Unit, Ottawa Police Victim Support Unit, the Sexual Sexual Assault Support Center and also with the Ottawa Victim Services. We've been working together in a campaign for Sexual Assault Awareness Month, and we continue with that. A letter of understanding for post-secondary campuses. There was a priority identified to have a sexual or sexual assault liaison for the secondary campuses, and a letter of understanding has been created and signed by by a few of the colleges, 2 of the colleges and 2 of the universities, to create a liaison to be specific to questions, issues, and it was decided to do the letter of understanding to ensure consistency, to ensure that if a specific member leaves that section, that this will continue and it will always be there for the campuses to come to. We are also continue to work on the trauma-informed training. It has been already involved in our domestic violence courses and in our sexual assault response officer courses, and of course our sexual assault courses. But we are creating it for the executive is coming up a specific training day, and it will be organizationally as well. And we will continue to ensure that the front line receives this training, as it's extremely important. Next slide. I think that's everything. If there are any questions.
Thank you very much, Inspector Lachine, for an excellent presentation and for all of the work that you are doing. We do have one public delegation. Before I go to the delegation, I see Chief Slowly, your hand is up. Did you want to add something?
Not me personally, Chair, but if you permit, I'd just like Acting Deputy Chief Mark Ford to say a few words before we go to the public delegation. Thank you. And thanks again, Heather. Great presentation.
Yeah, thank you, Chief. I did want to say a couple words. First off, thanks to everybody for the very kind words. It meant a lot to me. So thank you very, very much. It's an honor and a privilege to serve as a member of the Ottawa Police Service amongst so many great people. But I did want to talk very briefly about VAW. I want to acknowledge Heather. She's done a tremendous amount of work in this area, and I know she's just skimming along the surface. But I think, you know, part of what was in that presentation was a subtext that I want to point out, and that is the spirit of community co-production and working with the community stakeholders here. You know, it's never a very straight or linear type trajectory when working with the community. It involves a lot of effort, a lot of listening. I know a lot of our members of the board can appreciate that. But what you're seeing here is in the creation of this new VAW Senior Advisor, the Indigenous Women's Safety Table Advisor is exactly what we've been trying to do, is get that output where the community is informing us, participating in all our processes right from the beginning in developing these positions and what that work will look like in the future. And then I think the last point I would be remiss if I did not acknowledge, and this will probably be my last public acknowledgement, is that the community, the people that Heather and I have had the privilege to work with, and those being the community stakeholders, and a lot of these people, whether you know they're shelter EDs from shelters or support workers or hospitals or community resource centers, you know, these people are so committed and so passionate for all that they do. And I will acknowledge the fact that until last summer, I truly did not understand and appreciate the great work that they do. And we as a police service, we as a community are so fortunate to have such great people driving change in supporting survivors and victims of VAW or gender-based violence. And the one last thing I would say is that there is a great co-chair that works with Heather, Melanie Winwood, who came on last fall. And I can attest to countless hours that has been invested. So this program is in very good hands. There's still a lot of work to be done, but I leave knowing that it is in very good hands and on a great trajectory.
Okay, thank you, Acting Deputy Chief Ford, and we will all miss you very much. I'm going to call our first public delegation, Councillor Teresa Kavanagh.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you to members of the board and chief and staff. I very much appreciate that this is being made a priority. Violence against women is a massive problem. As the council liaison on women and gender equity, this is a priority for me. I'm particularly concerned about the effects of COVID-19 and the restrictions that we've had and the effects of the rate of violence against women. It is like an iceberg where I'm pretty sure that we're only seeing the tip of it and that much needs to be done. So the timing for this is very important. We need a lot of work to be done. I appreciate that Indigenous women are being treated respectfully in this very, very important issue, considering the history and the horrific past that has taken place. We do need to work closely with our partners in the Indigenous community. Community partnerships are the priority. And the one thing I have to emphasize is this should not be an Ottawa Police Services-led initiative. It should be a community-led initiative partnering with Ottawa Police Services. This is extremely important. We know the people on the ground. We know that they have the knowledge and they are very interested in working with the police, but we have to respect what they know and what they've seen. So I hope that that will continue. I want to give thanks to Sue Garvey, who's the former executive director of Cornerstone, who's helping me out today, who's got a wonderful background in working with women who are homeless and have seen violence. It is a subject that's close to her heart. If I may, Chair, I would like to ask some questions. I know that I am a delegation, but since that privilege was given to other members of council, I thought that I would ask that. I would like to know how will the Aboriginal Coalition be engaged in evaluating and refining its approach as it moves forward? I'd like to know how they're going to measure success in this approach. These are things that are concerning me. This is, of course, a national problem. We need to work with our partners even beyond our community on this issue. I'd like to know what the timeline is for coming back with a full strategy on violence against women, and how will we ensure that the community, that Ottawa Police Services is really wanting to come up with a new way of doing business against violence against women, so that women feel safer coming forward for help, and so they will not be let down by the court system when they ask for help. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
And thank you very much, Councillor Kavanagh. And you're correct, you, as a member of council, not of the board, can't ask questions, but when we get to questions from board members, I'm sure someone will ask the service on your behalf. So thank you again for being here, and Member Nerman, we'll go to you.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks, Heather, for a nice presentation and very informative. I have a question, if you can enlighten me, and this is in particular to the growing incidents which have been coming to my knowledge from the member of the community. Now, do we have any center or support center in place who supports the women from the South or East Asian background, more particularly these women who do not speak English or French? They speak generally Punjabi and Hindi.
Heather, please go ahead. We'll default to you to respond, and then Mark as support there.
Absolutely. So I'll start, Daljeet. Thank you very much for your question. We, as I said in my presentation, are meeting with Immigrant Women's Services of Ottawa, who specifically provide an incredible resource to, they have many languages that they assist and provide a resource to women who are in crisis or have experienced violence, to assist them in their own language to get the resources that they need. And they have received, they are working with the Ottawa Police Service and received trauma-informed training. They are excellent with what they do, to know what resources to go to and how to help those women. Mark, did you have more to add to that?
No, I think you covered it. That's I would sum it up by saying that there's a vast array and network of supports available there. But one of the first touch points, Member Nerman, is through IWSO, and that is the interpretation services provided by them. And in addition, to the trauma-informed training that they receive, they are also trained and work collaboratively with us through the investigators and our VSU, Victim Services Unit, to make sure that they are aware of the full array of services, not only by the OPS, but as well as throughout the community, so that they can be directed, victims or survivors of violence can be directed to the appropriate resources.
And Member Nerman, I'll also add, sorry if I can, this is a service that's provided for free, the interpretation services to these women.
And just thank you for that information. So I have a brief suggestion, if you can consider. There are two other organizations. OCISO is one. I know them because I was their board of director for many years before joining the board. So, and the second is the Catholic Immigration Center. So if you want to use those resources as well, that will be helpful. So thank you, Chair. That was my question.
Okay, thank you, Member Nerman. Member Johnson.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So Inspector Lachine, just really a comment and then a question. So first then, this is such an important topic because not only does it impact women, it impacts their children and impacts our social and economic situation in Ottawa, as women who've experienced violence are not often able to hold a job. So there's so many ripple effects that make this so important. And then just to follow up on the question of what you think the timeline to a full strategy would approximately be. Thank you.
Thank you. So in answer to your question, I think we are trending in the right direction with our Violence Against Women Senior Advisor position. And this person will be a direct liaison, as well as myself, with the advocates and the community members. And I think as far as a strategy goes at the moment, we're working for this position, but also we're listening to the community to identify what they see as priorities. And we will base our strategy on what their priorities are and what they want to see. Specific to this expert advisor position, like I said, this job description, what this position is going to be was driven completely by the community. And they told us what they wanted and what they wanted to see in this position. And I think from there, they will continue to be able to identify their priorities. And with the Violence Against Women advocate case reviews, identifying the trends for improvement and change, that will drive what the strategy is. So for a timeline, I think it's a work in progress. To have a complete strategy, again, a work in progress, but I think what we're doing in creating this position and what this position will represent for the community, this is exactly what's needed to progress forward with that.
Excellent. Yes, thank you. So yeah, that makes a lot of sense that it's really more of a process. This is an ongoing, complicated problem. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Member Johnson. Acting Deputy Chief Ford, did you want to add something?
Yeah, just very briefly, and to build upon what Inspector Lachine said. Whereas the work that Heather and I have been involved with, working with our community partners, has been focused on that intersectionality between police and the justice system and the VAW survivors and etc. You know, there is also a parallel piece of work being conducted by the city through the community safety well-being, and one of the principal pillars of that work is around VAW and looking at the social determinants that are contributing to this and what can we do from a prevention standpoint. So to say that we're doing one piece of work that is very focused around the policing and the justice, there is a greater piece of work that's being conducted and led through the city that we are very much aligned to and have had conversations so that we're creating that coordination and collaboration between our efforts.
Thank you. And thank you, Member Johnson. Member King.
Thank you, Chair. I just really wanted to follow up on some of the questions that our colleague, Councillor Kavanaugh, had asked around, I guess, outreach to the Indigenous community, especially when we think in light of the somber discovery and events that have just occurred with Kamloops residential school. That are top of mind. So I was interested in terms of the outreach that the police service in terms of the strategy has made to the Indigenous community. I know that Councillor Kavanaugh had mentioned the Ottawa Aboriginal Coalition in particular. So I'm just curious if you could outline the work in terms of community outreach that has been undertaken.
Absolutely. So to start with, it was initially, it was partners who were on our Violence Against Women Advisory Committee that we met with, and they identified specific community members to consult with. And from there, it went to consulting with Joan Riggs in the community and other members of the Ottawa Aboriginal community. And further to that, there's been engagement with the executive director of Tweegan, who graciously has taken the opportunity to work with myself to discuss Indigenous harm reduction and service to young Indigenous females. And I've also been engaging with the Inuit community to identify how we can improve frontline services to these young Indigenous youth who have experienced trauma throughout their life, and how to best serve them when dealing with them from a police service perspective when they are experiencing trauma, violence in crisis in the community. So it's engagement in a number of ways, but particular, it will be to sit. We're honored to be able to have a seat at the Indigenous Women's Safety table, where I think this will really be the true engagement of bringing everyone together to identify how we can improve the systems that are unsafe for the Indigenous in our community.
I appreciate that answer. And I had just one last question, and it really also stems from the role of Councillor Kavanaugh as a council liaison around women and gender equity issues. I know that she had mentioned the idea of citywide approach, in a sense, one that is not led by the police service. And of course, just recently, we saw the release of a women and gender equity strategy. And I'd also like to acknowledge our chair's work in that and bringing back that idea to the city. So I was just wondering, what are the linkages, the potential linkages between the citywide strategy and what is being proposed here with the violence against women strategy at the police service?
Thank you, Member King. We actually, Acting Deputy Chief Ford and I actually met with Councillor Kavanaugh, and we also met with the city around the gender and equity strategy, and we we will be connected. There is intersectionality to all of it, but we found when we met that the best opportunity would be to connect them with Superintendent Granger and her team with the Ottawa Police Service. And when required, we will work with them, but there will be a connection to the Ottawa Police Service in what they are doing.
That's good to know. And thank you so much for your in-depth report. And thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Member King. I saw Chief Slowly's hand up and now it's gone off my screen.
No, Chair, thank you. The point was made, so thank you very much. And again, I appreciate the leadership of Acting Deputy Chief Mark Ford. Previously, actually, Acting Deputy Joan McKenna played an important role in this area. Acting Deputy Jamie Dunlop also played a leadership role. And we've got a great next generation leader in Heather Lachine with both hands firmly on that baton. But I hope this also demonstrates long before my arrival and long before this command team was put together, leaders from many different backgrounds have taken their turn at pushing this important issue forward for the community and for the service. So my appreciation to all involved here.
Thank you. Thank you, Chief Slowly. The one question that Councillor Kavanagh had posed that I didn't hear an answer to was about measuring success. Can someone just speak about that?
Mark, did you want to speak to it, or I saw you come off mute. I could also, if you would like.
Go for it, Heather, and then I'll build upon.
I think for us, the measuring the success with the violence against women strategy will be particular to where we see working with the community and how we see improvements are made and the feedback from the community. I don't think we can measure our success unless we have the feedback from the community. As far as the Indigenous Women Safety Advisor position, that it remains to be seen as it's in such the initial stages, but again, it will be just the ongoing feedback from the community and looking at because of the various priorities. For example, we will be looking at statistics and trends, and I think our violence against women advocate case reviews will be a really good example of how we can measure our successes and measure improvements that are being made with respect to the response to victims. Mark?
Yeah, I think you did a great job, and I really don't have much to add that other than to emphasize a point that that you made, is that in specific, and I know Councillor Kavanagh's question was around the Indigenous Women Safety Table Advisor, and we are very much at early stages. And I will tell you, and Inspector Lachine spoke to this, is we went in with one idea, had discussions with our community partners in the Indigenous community, and came out with a very different direction. And they were very clear that the saying that I think that we pretty much made a t-shirt out of is nothing about us without us. And they're like, we really want to focus on developing this roadmap with that Indigenous Women's Safety Table, and to say that we have an idea of what that framework from an evaluation standpoint will look like is premature, because we need to develop that roadmap with our community partners in that specific milieu.
Okay, thank you. Chief Slowly, I see your hand up again.
Yeah, I couldn't resist, Chair. Thank you. Maybe it relates to a number of topics. In your comments, Chair, earlier on, you talked about the mental health strategy and the need to find an appropriate table around which a whole of city, a one city approach can come together. The Toronto Police Service doesn't own the mental health strategy. The Toronto Police Service doesn't own a gun violence strategy. The Toronto Police Service doesn't own the violence against women strategy. At different times in my tenure as a police officer, yes, the police service has either tried to own it or been forced to own it because nobody else wanted to control these things. The new Police Act legislation that you referenced and that I've continued to reference takes ownership of public safety away from the chief of police and the police of jurisdiction and rightfully places it into the hands of the municipal or the regional authority. It requires the involvement of the healthcare sector, the education sector, the social services sector, and representative demographics and geographic leadership in it. And yes, it requires the involvement of the police, not the exclusion of the police, but the participation of the police as a support to those plans, not as a leader of those plans. So we've heard several delegations come on today and many other times in the past, accusing the police service here of trying to own these things. I don't know how many more times we could clearly state that is no longer the operating model of the Ottawa Police Service. That is no longer the legislation of the Police Act. We've tried to demonstrate that over and over again with the leadership of Steve Bell on the mental health strategy. You've heard it repeatedly demonstrated here on the VAW strategy. You've heard it, we talked about our guns violence strategy, how we need to bring community and civil actors into the larger strategy while still owning and leading the portion that is relevant to us. You keep hearing from a number of delegations that that is not what we're saying, that is not what we're doing, and that is not what is happening. And again, here today in the VAW example, you can see proof that we are actually giving up control, turning it over to the community. Even when we get a question like, when will this strategy be completed? We can no longer answer those questions, as simple as they may be, because it'll be completed when the community says it's completed on their timelines. So it makes it difficult for us to provide definitive answers to very important questions. It makes it difficult for us to provide very clear budget and resource implications for these plans, but it is actually the right thing to do and to do it in the right way. So we're all going to have to learn how to do it differently, but to keep hearing the accusations that we're somehow resisting this or undermining it, I have to say is quite frustrating. The proof's in the pudding. We're doing this very differently and we're actually getting better outcomes as a result of it.
Okay, thank you, Chief. Seeing no further questions or comments or hands up, can we receive the strategy? Receive?
Received.
Okay, and thank you again, Deputy Chief, Acting Deputy Chief Mark Ford and Inspector Lashane for your participation today. We will move now to item number 5, which is a presentation on OPS de-escalation training. And Chief Slowly, I will hand it over to you.
Thank you, Chair, Board. You can appreciate you've had a number of large presentations on very meaty topics today, but they're all very critical and questions that you've raised as a board and that our community has raised. De-escalation is at the heart of a number of the use of force issues and some of the most contentious issues that we've been dealing with in recent times and in the distant past. I want to thank Deputy Chief Steve Bell for his leadership, and he's got a team here to make the presentation. I'm going to turn things over to Deputy Chief Steve Bell to introduce his team and the topic.
Yeah, thank you very much, Chief. Thank you very much, Chair. We're looking forward to providing you an update on our progress that we're making around de-escalation training. We know in 2014, following a national inquiry into an in-custody death with the RCMP, that there were several recommendations that were brought out around the need to embed de-escalation training into police use of force models and police response models. 2015, at the call of the board, loudly by Member Smallwood, who's always been a very strong advocate for the embedding of de-escalation training, OPS picked it up, probably in earnest at that point. What I can tell you in 2021, de-escalation training is absolutely the cornerstone of how we deliver all of our training. There is not a training component or program within the Ottawa Police Service that doesn't have a component of de-escalation training to it. We've got to the point that we've redeveloped our use of force training and redeveloped our use of force requalifications so that the main portion and the main center of how we deliver it all is around de-escalation training. We've got to the point now over a number of years where we arguably lead the province and we're an outstanding advocate for this model across the country. What we're going to do today is we'll give you some of the foundation, statutory regulatory foundation of where we launch from, and then we'll be able to explain to you exactly how we've looked at embedding de-escalation training into all of our training components. So I am going to turn it over to Staff Sergeant LeBlanc, Inspector Zacharias, and Sergeant Adam Payne, who are going to take us through the presentation today.
Thank you very much. There is a PowerPoint. I'll just wait till that comes up. And Inspector Zacharias, before we start, was there anything you wanted to add? I could take that as a no. Okay, you can go to the next slide, please. Okay, I just have a variety of pictures here to start off with. So some are officers in engaging with the community, others are involved in training. So as Deputy Bell said, the reality in policing these days is certain equipment and training is necessary for community safety. So although it doesn't look pleasant, for instance, officers carrying carbines at the airport and outside major events, they're there to protect the community and protect the people at those facilities and those events. So we have to be very conscious of the training we provide. And as Deputy Bell said, the foundational skills and competencies related to use of force have a foundation in de-escalation and communication. And not only that, they are woven through a number of other training programs that we provide. And I'll get into that later on in the presentation. Slide, please. So the definition, the Ontario Police College definition of de-escalation is the use of verbal and non-verbal strategies intended to prevent escalation or reduce the intensity of a situation without the application of force. And if force is necessary, reducing the amount of force if reasonably safe to do so. So that's the Ontario Police College definition. So to understand, before I get into our de-escalation program, I'll just kind of explain a little bit of the legal authorities and regulations that kind of oversee policing in Ontario. So next slide, please. So the authority to use force comes from federal law. So Section 25 of the Criminal Code, again, without going through the entire section, authorizes peace officers to use force in the lawful execution of our duties. And Section 26 is a limitation. So that means if excessive force is used, then we're held accountable for that. So just to summarize the legal authorities, police can use force that's reasonable, necessary, and proportionate given the situations with reasonable grounds and in the lawful execution of our duties. Next slide, please. So now I'll just get into the what the ministry is responsible in terms of use of force and training. So in Ontario, the Ministry of Community Safety and Correctional Services is responsible for use of force policy and the police training mandate. The Ontario Policing Standards Manual provides the adequacy standards that outlines the content of all training in Ontario. That includes the Ontario Police College Basic Constable Training Program, the content of all in-service training and annual recalls. The Regulation 926 outlines police uniform equipment standards, including weapon standards, and the use of force reporting requirements. The Ontario Police College delivers the training mandate provided by the ministry, mainly the basic constable training program. So all recruits that are hired as police officers in the province of Ontario all attend the Ontario Police College for their basic constable training. And the Ontario Police College also provides the training to all in-service use of force instructors. Therefore, any use of force instructor from the Ottawa Police first has to go down to the Ontario Police College and be qualified as an instructor to be able to deliver use of force training within their own services. Slide, please. I'll put up the use of force model in a second. I'm not going to go too in depth into the use of force model. We're just going to touch on the areas where the new de-escalation kind of theory is inserted into the model. So just to give a brief recap of the use of force model, the model is not an authority. So the Ontario use of force model is a visual aid designed to assist in understanding as I described in the authorities, there's a proportional relationship between the situation and the level of force that's reasonable and necessary. So the use of force model is just a visual aid to allow officers, to allow anybody, the public, to understand the relationship between behaviors that we encounter and the levels of force that are reasonable and necessary to use in those situations. So the model was originally developed in 1991 and it was revised in 2004. And the main kind of people involved were use of force experts and policy experts. So we'll just go to the actual model itself. So next slide, please. So this should be a fairly familiar model. It's been around for quite a while. So just to go through the basics of it, at the bottom the model reads, if the officer continually assesses the situation and selects the most reasonable option relative to those circumstances as perceived at that point of time. So basically, it's always an evolving and changing situation, and the officer has to continually assess, plan, revise the plan, and act accordingly. So rather than going into the entire model, the de-escalation portion focuses on the blue and green rings of the model. So you have the officer presence and communication rings. So in the model in 2004, there wasn't a very robust explanation of strategies placed in those areas. Having said that, the Ontario Police College, as part of the basic constable training program, always had a communication plan that was inserted in there. So back in the late 90s, early 2000s, it was titled Tactical Communication. Then it evolved in the 2004 model into communication, and now it's developing into the communication and de-escalation program that's going to be developed and implemented by the ministry and the Ontario Police College. So as just to get into it, there are some changes potentially coming up. I'll refer to them in my closing remarks. But in 2017, the Ombudsman of Ontario reviewed a number of incidents, mostly in the Toronto area, involving police use of force. So the most well-known one was the Sammy Yatim shooting by the Toronto Police Service. And the Ombudsman implemented or requested 22 recommendations that the ministry comply with. So as a result, there's a number of projects ongoing right now. So some of the projects they're looking at the actual use of force model itself, whether it's to be revised or replaced with another response model completely. There's a provincial de-escalation program that's also in development, and there's other things such as a curriculum review of the Ontario Police College Basic Constable Training Program. So having said that, the Ontario Police College have implemented updates and changes in the Basic Constable Training Program that are effective now, and our recruits have gone through that. We've had instructors down there embedded with the college to understand exactly what they're teaching. Next slide, please. So just to kind of build on what Deputy Bell said in the introduction, and I know members of the board are aware of this, but although Ontario is just developing their own de-escalation model or de-escalation and communication program now, the province of British Columbia have had one for years. So this is following the death of Robert Jacansky at the Vancouver airport and the subsequent inquiry, which was the Braidwood inquiry, which finished in 2010, and also had a list of recommendations. And as a result of that, the Justice Institute of British Columbia developed their own provincial de-escalation program. So in 2014, members of the Ottawa Police Professional Development Center reviewed that program and basically implemented it here in the Ottawa Police. So we've had our own de-escalation program here, which was seen as the gold standard at the time and has developed and been modernized several times. We still have that as the cornerstone of our de-escalation program, while we're working with the ministry and the Ontario Police College to wait and see what program they're going to implement. Next slide, please. So we'll just do a quick review. So this is basically the communication and de-escalation model. So if you remember when I had the use of force model up, the blue and green rings, this is a more formal strategy. I'm not going to get too in depth into the steps, but we'll just do a quick review. So it allows officers to have a more solid intervention strategy when dealing with persons in crisis. So we'll just go through it, the components very quickly. So this program provides officers with an enhanced awareness in dealing with persons in crisis, especially those relating to mental health disorders. So the program includes a communication and de-escalation model. That's a strategy for crisis intervention. So as you can see, there's 4 stages in the model. The first, contact and rapport building to start to de-escalate the situation. The crisis assessment and rapport building stage, the collaborative building of solutions, and then the resolution and follow-up based on what the collaboration part was. So again, this adds a more formalized strategy to insert into the existing model as we're waiting for the development of the new provincial strategy. Slide, please. So when discussing the principles of de-escalation, officers have to use sound officer safety. So, and again, not all situations can be de-escalated. However, officers are to do their best, again, to employ the strategies given the situation to attempt de-escalation. So employing de-escalation concepts can't or must not result in the abandoning of proper technique or otherwise justify officer safety or public safety. The de-escalation training is included in the use of force component of training. So it's difficult to have de-escalation training, without having the possibility of it developing into a use of force scenario. So that comes with the realism, the development of stress inoculation, and for officers to learn to function under stress. And I know members of the board have viewed our training and possibly have been part of it. So you probably have an understanding when you're put on the spot having to deal with a situation that your ability to communicate changes when stress kicks in. So that's why we do have a academic training portion where they learn the model. And then right away, we start to weave it into the regular training. So this as much scenario-based training, and this is in terms of the regular use of force training, the conducted energy weapon training, and carbine training. It's all a large part of that. So again, the biggest part of the training is for officers to monitor internally to make sure that they're in a position to be able to understand the situation and communicate effectively. So that means they have to monitor their internal stress, and that's basically the principle of non-escalation. So we don't want officers to be escalated themselves because of the level of stress that they're facing in a given situation. So, and this goes with the foundation principles and competencies related to this training, heavily linked to emotional intelligence, active listening, critical thinking, and duty of care. So those concepts, they're fairly new when we talk about it here at the Ottawa Police Service, but they've been the cornerstones of the de-escalation training and fair and impartial policing that we've provided for quite a few years now. So just to build on, I mentioned fair and impartial policing. So procedural justice and police legitimacy are important parts of this training and create a link to another important training component that we also provide, and that's also linked to all use of force related training and other training programs that we offer. Slide, please. So the fair and impartial policing program was adopted by PDC in 2016, and all sworn members have received the training. And as mentioned, it's incorporated into all use of force training and a number of other, say, leadership training programs, field training officer programs, for example. So the fair and impartial policing program is based on academic research and the science of human bias. So the goals of the training are to assist all officers to, and there's a list of 5 items there. So recognize our own human biases, understanding how implicit bias can affect perception and behavior, understand how biased policing impacts community members and the police service, and understand how fair and impartial policing supports police legitimacy. The development of skills and tactics to reduce the influence of bias and allow officers to be more safe, effective, and just police professionals. So that particular program, along with the de-escalation program, are kind of delivered in similar manner. So there's a academic component to both, which again just goes over the background information. And then as soon as possible, we get the officers to get involved in scenario-based training or tabletop exercises to reinforce the information there. Next slide, please. So here I just have a graph that represents the amount of training that the Ottawa Police recruits get currently. So you see that there's a lot there. So I'll just kind of focus in on a few of the sections. So we talked about use of force, de-escalation, fair and impartial policing, how it's kind of all incorporated. So basically what we have here is a graph that shows that Ottawa Police recruits get about 1,700 hours of training in their first year of service. So almost 600 of those hours in different categories there are directly related to the application of force, de-escalation, fair and impartial policing, ethics training, all those important subjects that form the cornerstones of police training, and especially their interaction with the public in de-escalation matters. And as I mentioned before, a lot of those skills are woven into our field training officer program, otherwise known as our primary leadership program, our operational leadership program for frontline supervisors, and our critical incident response training, which basically trains frontline officers to respond to critical incidents. So we basically employ the same skill sets to larger scale responses and the same skills that an officer would require just responding in a one-on-one scenario. So there's a lot of commonality of the training, a lot of use of the same skills, again with the foundations in emotional intelligence and duty of care. Next slide, please. So just to kind of wrap up here. As I mentioned before, the Ontario Ombudsman's report that was delivered in 2017 is kind of the driving force behind the changes and updates to the provincial training curriculum. So members of the Ottawa Police Development Center have been involved in the working groups that are reviewing and developing the new material. There has been stakeholder consultation, there's been community consultation at the provincial level, rather than just, and again, the difference now being the amount of academic review that's done. So when the 2004 and 1991 model was developed, it was developed by policy experts and use of force experts, where now they're heavily relying on academic review, community consultation, and stakeholder consultation as well. So that's at the ministry level. Like I said, we are involved. So we have members embedded in all working groups of all new training that's coming and being developed by the ministry. And we're just, COVID had an impact on that. So it's been delayed by probably about a year from what we can tell. And if there's any updates that are going to be coming up imminently, we'll provide updates. Otherwise, due to the kind of proactive efforts of members at the Professional Development Center over the years, we're in a good position now. So we have a very good de-escalation program. It's well established. It's been part of training since 2014. And the fair and impartial policing program as well came in 2016, and again, widely used and definitely woven through a number of training programs that we provide. Other than that, we do have, well, before COVID and hopefully after, PDC does have an open door policy. So when conditions do allow it, we have an open door policy for members of the board, community, and the media to come in anytime to review our training programs. And again, it could be in-service training. The recruits are still here if conditions ease while the recruits are still here, and there's an opportunity for a few board members to come in and kind of witness what they're going through in their training before they hit the road, you're more welcome to come in. So that's what I have for now. If there's any questions, I do have Sergeant Adam Payne with me here as well. Due to some technical difficulties, he's sitting 2 meters or more to the right of me.
Okay, thank you very much, Sergeant LeBlanc. There are a number of hands up. Deputy Chief Bell, did you want to say something before I go to questions?
Yeah, thank you for that. So thanks for that presentation, Jeff. Great job. Jeff spoke about having an invite extended to members of the board. I know we've done that in the past and brought them through as a group to actually engage in the training. We're looking at potentially doing it a little differently this time, and what we'd like to do is have smaller groups once restrictions ease, be able to come in and observe the training that's occurring with the members while they are doing it at any different portion at any different time. So we're hoping, not to prejudge where the pandemic goes, but we're hoping that within the next month or so we can have smaller groups of board members. We're also going to invite our CEC and other community members in to observe the training and the changes we've made around it.
Okay, thank you for that. Are you also going to allow the media in to see that?
Absolutely. As Jeff said, we have an open door policy. We've had members of the media in previously, and we'd be more than happy to have them in again.
Okay, thank you. Member Nerman.
Thank you, Chair. And thanks to the presentation on the de-escalation to the entire team, BC Bell, Inspector Zach Rice, and others. As you will recall, I had raised a written inquiry in regard to the use of force training procedure and for engagement in negotiations and de-escalation a situation, especially when the person in crisis has a language barriers, and the service responded to the same. In September of 2020 board meeting, number was 12008. I will quote the extract of reply from the service, and the quote and beginning of the quote is, annual use of force training at a professional development center and can include using recognized hand signals and other non-verbal calming measures. The service in the same reply went further, and I quote, if an incident is emergent, an officer can request an ad hoc translator to attend, which be an on-duty officer who speaks the required language. End of the quote. I refer to the situation, and I am repeating this, and forgive me if it's a repetition, but for the sake of the convenience and understanding, I am doing that. I refer to the situation at the Rideau Hall when an armed intruder breached the security and communication skills were used to de-escalate the situation by the RCMP. While conversely, the one in Mississauga, where Mr. Ahmed in the apartment was probably shot, as the tactical team lacked communication skills and were not able to de-escalate the situation. Now coming to the present presentation, and forgive me and please enlighten me if I am missing something, I don't see any mentioning of that important aspect in today's presentation. So my inquiry is that if there is a crisis call and the OPS frontline have to respond to the situation and as per their present practices, request services of the translator as quoted above, which for some reason is not available or delayed for any reasons, what would the frontline officers are required to do? Will your officers engage without verbal communications, which is an important aspect of such a de-escalation, or will allow to escalate the situation? Thank you.
So thank you, Member Nerman. I'll start with the answer, and then I'll let Staff Sergeant LeBlanc top up if I missed anything. So thank you for your previous inquiry, and thank you now for your question. What I can tell you is that I actually recently just went through my use of force requalification, and one of the things that I was very impressed with was how there has been the adoption and implementation of nonverbal signals within the actual use of force training. There's considerable amount of time placed on the effect of how you position yourself, how you look, how you pose your hands, and several different things that you can do to assist in the de-escalation training. So in terms of the hand signals and the use of bodies to de-escalate situations, where you stand, how you approach something, that has been widely incorporated in our training this year. In terms of the ability to access translation, we actively look to engage in making sure through many of our different partners and some of our contracted resources that if there is the need for specific translations and we don't have the capability internally, that we will reach out to those partners or contracted resources to bring in those translating abilities for us. So in both those areas, I can actually advise you we have had progress, and we are trying to meet the needs of our communities in both those areas.
Yeah, and I could just top up as well on what the deputy said. So like I mentioned in my presentation, the concepts that we deliver for use of force training are similar to the concepts used in our critical incident response training. So the key elements there, especially when in a situation like you're talking about, Councillor Nerman, is what's required.
I love to be counselor, but I'm.
Oh, sorry. Sorry, member. Basically, time and distance is required to negotiate, right? So there are common techniques that we deliver in use of force training and in our critical incident response training, which is intended to increase the amount of time. So whether it's isolating the incident, containment, evacuating the area, in order to create the time required to develop a communication plan. So that is part of our use of force training and our initial critical incidents response training.
Thank you, thank you, DC Bell and Inspector or Sergeant Lever.
Now I got an upgrade.
So just a follow-up, as I have gone through the presentation and I saw that this is under review at the provincial level. So is it possible that this feedback from as a member of the board, because Ottawa is becoming a multilingual city, that this important feedback is incorporated and embedded into that policy instead of the OPS relying on the translators or ad hoc mayors, but we have something concrete going forward and make sure that these de-escalation contain the element of the language barriers as well, so that no human life is lost because of that deficiency.
So thank you, Member Nerman. What I can say to that before I turn it over to Inspector Zacharias is, although we have members who contribute to developing those policies and procedures, ultimately that authority sits with the provincial government. We lead the way in the province and try to embed all of those practices within our own training. But ultimately, it is the province that will determine the adequacy standards around this. So we can share that input with them. We can provide them with that perspective, but we aren't able to absolutely influence how the adequacy standards or legislation reads at the end of the day. That is ultimately a provincial responsibility. So Dave, do you have anything more you want to add to that? Can't hear you, Dave.
Sorry, can you hear me now?
Yeah, you're good now.
Okay, sorry, apologies. Member Nerman, thank you for those great questions. I can tell you, so at any given time, our members' skills, language skills, are actually mentioned in the roster, duty roster, when they're working. So say when there's a need for a member that speaks a specific language, the dispatcher will make that request over the radio. Again, the beauty of this thing is that often we have members stepping up Say, for example, if we ask for an Arabic speaking officer who's required to help out with the investigation or communication, we were able to find that. And also the good news, the last recruit class, we added 20 additional languages into our service. So that's enriching our language capacity in terms of providing police service to a diverse community. So I can also speak from my personal own experience. I know DC Bell was involved during the Tamil protests. We had no lines of communication with the Tamil community. So that really stalled, the road was shut down for a long period of time, if you recall Wellington Street, but we had to get, that language capability within from our service, identify who speaks those languages, come and help out with the intervention. So it's a work in progress. And as far as our EDI strategic priorities in terms of recruiting is going to help us fill that gap, hopefully.
Thank you, Inspector Zacharias. Thank you, Chair. That was my question.
Okay, thank you very much, Member Nerman. Member Smallwood.
Thank you very much, Chair. Hopefully my bandwidth has been acting up, so I might get cut off, but I'll do my best. Like Member Nerman, I had a question that sort of follows up on an inquiry I've had outstanding for a couple of years now. And it was, when I saw the presentation and I'm glad that it was mentioned about the pictures of the uniforms worn and the equipment carried, because I think, as Deputy Bell said, we have come aware, and I think we've come great distances in terms of de-escalation. One of the things that has been made aware over time, as Deputy Bell mentioned, the nonverbal signals and how you look. And uniforms play such an important role. And in fact, as has been shown, in fact, I was interested in a presentation cahoots. Data chat of de-escalation was served to escalate a situation. And so I know I'm always pushing on this, but I would rather like to see more emphasis on dealing with that. I know that there was a comment made about ministry standards with respect to the uniforms, but I also know, having watched a lot of OPS responses to different incidences, that we do get to choose, to a certain extent, the type of uniform worn. And I think that part of this de-escalation should be a conscious effort to de-escalate the amount of uniform equipment and the appearance of the officers, because I think it helps the officers, the community, and there wasn't any mention of that in the presentation. So I would like to, as an of de-escalation, is the decisions that are made by our commanders as to what level of response there will be. Thank you.
So, Chair Deans, I think I got most of that question, and I'll try my best. Member Smallwood, please let me know if I've missed it in any way. You broke up 3 or 4 times through it. So I think the essence of it is around how we present within the community, mainly around our uniform and our uniform presence. So what I can tell you is we're currently, or will be in the very near future, conducting a review through our Staff Sergeant Major Corps, who is responsible for our equipment and clothing policy. So that's been an area that has been regularly identified to us in terms of something that we should be looking at, gathering community input on in terms of how we present ourselves from a uniform perspective within the community. That isn't work that has yet been undertaken, but it is something that is in the Staff Sergeant Major Corps work plan to take on in the near future or coming months.
Thanks very much. I really appreciate that, and I look forward to some good conversations on that. Thank you.
Inspector Zacharias, did you want to add something?
Yeah, I just want to add another initiative that's underway at a national level. that was not touched on at this presentation, but the Canadian Association of Chiefs of Police are actually, I've passed a table that I'm part of. We're looking at we're looking at a national model, use of force model, a decision-making model that's going to incorporate de-escalation. So this will be something coming at a national level. It's work in progress at this point, and you know, we're not there yet, but eventually, you know, we'll bring everybody together, all the provinces, and we'll see where we go. But there is a strong appetite for a national model as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there any other questions or comments? Seeing none, received on the report?
Received.
Received. Thank you. The next held item is item number 10, 2020 to 2022, Equity, Diversity and Inclusion Action Plan Update. And Member Nerman, you had a question.
Thank you, Chair. I have just a small comment to that. I wish to appreciate the great efforts of this team, the chief, in prioritizing this EDI thing, and the members is Superintendent Granger and Laurie Fenton putting a lot of labor into that. And my request or suggestion to the chief is that we are putting an EDI lens to everything, and I hope that in the coming days or the weeks, the same lens will be put into the promotions and the elevations to the members of the color, marginalized and racialized population into the levels of the inspector and superintendents as well. So that was my comment. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Member Nerman. Received on the report?
Received.
Thank you. Item number 11, Workforce Management Report, first quarter 2021. Member Johnson, you have this item.
Yes, thank you very much. So, yeah, so this really relates to the freezing of the budget that's been under discussion. And there's been a working group, just to remind everyone, set up with Vice Chair Smallwood and myself, and others have joined us. And so we got to the point of, you know, the OPS command team, senior leadership is now going to prepare options to hold the budget. And so for now, we talked about a hold on new hires in 2021. And that was really just to avoid hiring new members. And then depending on what happened with the budget process, have to let these new hires go. Now we've got 5 or 6 hours we've spent so far working on this with Chief and Deputy Chief Bell. And so when I reviewed this very comprehensive, well-written workforce management report, I did notice it contains the plan to hire 28 sworn officers, as well as some or even more than the number of sworn officers, civilian members. So my question is, and this might be somewhat process, can we hold this report and plan for a working group meeting to review the OPS's command team's proposals on freezing the budget and consider hiring within the context of the budget proposals? A bit long-winded, thank you.
Okay, I'm going to turn that over to Steve Bell for first.
Yeah, so thank you, Member Johnson, for the question. So what the workforce management report is a Q1 update. What you're referring to is actually on page 3 in table 1, I believe, and that is our projected hiring plan. Now, the important thing to remember about the projected hiring plan for us is it anticipates retirements, and it anticipates hiring retirements for the amount of time that we need to prepare them. When we hire, as anticipated here in Q4, so it would be late November, early December, where we would look at bringing members into the organization, there would be a 10-month lag before they're actually operational and ready to go. out on the street and provide services to the community. So as the projection exists right now, we think in order to be prepared going into next year for the amount of retirements that we will see in the remainder of this year and early next year, because as you know, most of our retirements happen in Q1 of a year, in January, the end of January normally, we would need to project to hire 28 people by the end of this year, so late November, early December. But again, this is only a projection. So the Q1 report could stand, if it was acceptable to the board, as a report that would embed those projections. We wouldn't actually be making hiring offers until well after the budget for next year had been approved. Our budget cycle takes us into around November, when it will go before council, and we work backwards from that within the board. So these letters of offer to hire would not go out until after that budget was approved, which would mean if the budget, depending on the budget scenario that would exist, we would hire these people or not, depending on what was approved for next year. So my suggestion would be, I don't believe we need to hold this report because it's just a Q1 update, but that we can continually to revisit as we bring quarter updates back to you as the year goes through.
You're on mute, Member Johnson.
Yeah, got it. Thank you. Sorry about that. I think that makes sense, but still the component of how we freeze the budget, because most of the costs are salaries. I understand that, you know, the 10 months or 9 months to train, but if we, to freeze this budget, have to have less sworn and less civilian officers, yet we begin the process to train them for 9 months ahead, it seems like we're just, I'm not sure how we get there, but perhaps someone else can, yeah.
So yeah, for sure. And maybe I wasn't clear in how I described it, and I apologize if that's the case. These officers there's a hiring class that's going out in May. We have no recruits in that class. There's another hiring class that will go out in August. We have no recruits that are going to be going to that class. The soonest that we would be hiring would be into December. And that means that our budgeting process has been completed prior to us having to make any letters of offer. This is a projection for us so that we have a working document to know where we would land from an FTE count and a budget count as the budget exists in this year. Those amendments can be made as we progress through the year.
Perfect. Thank you. That
Thank
helps.
you. Thank you, Member Johnson. Received on the report?
Received.
Thank you. Item number 12, financial status report, first quarter 2021 and draft 2022 budget process. Member Smallwood. See. We can't hear you, Member Smallwood.
Thank you. My phone actually shut down and just reconnected as you were saying. We can't hear you. So I'm guessing you were asking me about inquiry 12?
Yeah. Yes, item number 12. You held that and you had a question?
Yes. I just a quick question. I noticed in it that it talked about communicating with, and I'm sorry, I'll leave my video off because I'm assuming that will help with the bandwidth issues they seem to be facing. There was a comment that there'd be consultations with the councillors during the months of May and June, and I haven't heard that discussed at our working group, and I think it would be helpful for the Finance and Audit Committee to be hearing the feedback that we're getting from city councillors on this. So I'm just wondering if I don't see it as being something where we would anyway impede the setting up of these meetings, but I think it would be helpful if we could be invited so that if we can attend, we can hear what concerns are being raised by councillors with respect to this going forward.
So thank you, Member Smallwood. So just for my input, are you looking for us to come back to the Finance and Audit Committee and report on the input we're getting from the counselors, or are you looking to attend the meetings with the counselors?
I think it would be better to attend the meetings. That saves you having to report back. And it means that we just hear what they have to say. And as I said, I don't see it as being something where in any way our availability would impact your ability to hold the meetings. We can either attend or not. It's on Zoom. I would assume they're all Zoom meetings. So it would just be a case of us being able to, I forget what the term is, but essentially sit and listen into what the concerns raised are.
So what I can tell you is we have the first round of meetings set up.
Or
I'm not sure if you can hear me. We have the first round.
I heard you say you have the first round of meetings set up. As I say, if you could just include the working group in the invitation, then we can attend or not attend.
So we talk about, okay, so that maybe that's something that we can look at a practicality perspective at the working group meeting, if that's possible. We've extended the first set of meetings that will take us to mid-June. Then we've reiterated that we're going back for a second set of meetings post-June while we're actually doing the budget build. So it's probably a better time for the working group members to be engaged in that discussion at that point. Right now, we're actually trying to level set them in terms of where we are against this year's budget, similar to what we're providing in the Q1 report, how we're looking to bring the different pieces of information that we've included in this as well as stats around operations. So this set of meetings is truly about level setting ourselves with the counselors. We've then indicated to them that we will be going back once this 2-month cycle is done to actually have consultation and input on what they want to see within the budget. That may be a better time for the working group members to come in and start to be able to hear what the asks are. We actually haven't got to those in this series of meetings. So Member Smallwood, I'm not sure if that works for you, but we will be going back and would be happy to have conversations with you.
So I guess, Chair, with your permission, just my comment is that anytime we as a Finance and Audit Committee can hear input, it's valuable and important to us. So, and especially if we're not in any way harming the process that you're going through. So I would just say to you, if you see that you can invite us and it is not impeding the process that you're doing, then I would encourage you to invite us so that we, even if it's just listening to how you're providing a groundwork or a presentation to them, so we can get an understanding of what the councillors are hearing and then hear what their feedback is on it. It just helps us in terms of our discussions around the budget. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Member Smallwood. So received on the report?
Received.
Received, thank you. And then item number 16, response to inquiry 1-21-11, coach officer requirements training in advance of appointment. Member Smallwood, you have this item.
Thank you very much. Hopefully I'll be able to make it through this one. I just, my specific request asked for the information on what de-escalation training these field training officers would get. These officers would have the latest in terms of training. They would have the latest in terms of de-escalation techniques. And I think it would be very valuable to know that that they were, and I was surprised that that wasn't mentioned in the response to the inquiry, just because I think as we're all learning, this is really, really critical. And these officers, often what we hear is new police recruits are told, forget what you learned at college, this is where your learning begins. And so this is where the rubber hits the road, so to speak. And I think it's really important that we know that part of the field training officers' responsibilities is to provide the latest in terms of de-escalation training to those officers that they're mentoring. And I know there was a comment about it in the previous presentation on the de-escalation presentation, but as I say, it was a specific request to know what kind of de-escalation training was being provided by these coach officers to the people that are being trained by them. Thank you.
So Chair Deans, I can begin the answer to that question. So thank you for the question, Member Smallwood. I can absolutely tell you, like we identified in the presentation, de-escalation training is the cornerstone of every training package that we deliver, and that's including the field training officer. During the week of sessions, there are components around fair and impartial policing, which actually has a large component of de-escalation, as well as specifically discussions around de-escalation training. I know in the olden days, probably when I came on, which is the olden days now, that's what you used to hear when you came back from OPC was, forget what you learned there, here's what you do. We don't do that anymore. That is not what our field training officers teach in any sense. What I can tell you they do is they say, here's what you learned at OPC. Here's how we put it on, expand it, put it on steroids here when it comes to de-escalation training. So I can absolutely reiterate that it is the cornerstone of all of our training programs, and included in that is the field training officer program.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Member Smallwood. Any other comments or questions? Hearing none, is this item received? Someone's got some music going. Received?
Received.
Thank you. Okay, so this concludes the public agenda. Is there any other business before we move in camera? Seeing none, I will move that the Ottawa Police Services Board adjourn the public portion of its meeting to move in camera to discuss confidential items pertaining to legal, labor relations, and personal matters in accordance with Section 35(4)B of the Police Services Act. Is this motion carried?
Carried.
Carried. Okay, it being 3:54, the in-camera meeting will commence at 4:15. We'll see you all then.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you all.
Thank you.